So, gentlemen, let's go up on stage, and we can start the event. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Fantastic for you all to be here at the Global Energy Prize Summit at Euronews headquarters. As you can see, we have gone green. We went green in about summer 2015 when we moved here, at least the color anyway. I can't tell you about our energy consumption, but at least color, we've transitioned to green very well. I can tell you from working here that the green starts to fade after about a week, and it doesn't seem so green after that. You'll find on your seats where you're looking, where you're sitting down, you'll have a couple of different things. Something I can draw your attention to, the Global Energy of the Future report. Very interesting report, some great facts and figures in there, and a good basis for some of your questions perhaps later on. And of course also this document which gives you information about the Global Energy Prize and the speakers that we have for you today. My name's Jeremy Wilkes. I'm a producer for our science magazines here at Euronews. The other object you'll find, which is very interesting, which is your voting device, and you'll be able to vote and give your opinion on various energy-related matters later on in proceedings. So we're here from 10 o'clock until about 2 o'clock with a short coffee break. We're talking about energy, ecology, environment. We're talking about bringing together incredibly difficult challenges for society. But first off, I'm going to give words to Michael Peters, the President and CEO of Euronews, who's going to give his little welcome address. We'll watch a few videos and then get down to the debate. Michael.
I was just at...
Shall I go?
Yes, go for it.
Does it work? Yeah, so hello everyone. Very nice to welcome you here. I have to just to start my introduction with a small confess. It's a very big day for us because we worked a lot to welcome you all. When Igor called me 3 months ago to say, okay, we want to do something with a summit speaking about energy, ecology, economics, of course, etc., etc. He said, I will do it in Euronews only if you paint your building in green, because it's very ecologic. So it took us 3 months, but we did it, Igor. So we painted the building in green just for you. So I hope I hope you're happy with that. Yeah, because CNN was in red, so it was not working well. Yeah. Then the second reason why you're here, that Igor told me, okay, so let's say the theme of this seminar is the 3E, economics, ecology, and energy. So he said it's not the 3C, so we cannot do it CNN. We need to have a fourth E, which is E like Euronews. So this is equally the reason why you are all here. Thanks to this fantastic theme that you will speak about today. So as I promised, Igor, I will be very short. We are extremely honored to have you here with us. I think it's a great day for us as we are live on Euronews and many other platforms. And I know that Jeremy is very keen and is preparing this day and exciting by this day since many weeks, as he's our science specialist amongst others who are equally here. Euronews is extremely, let's say, concerned by science. I think we are one of the, if not the international media who speaks the most about science and energy in general. So that's why it's a big honor for us. I think that's the fact to be rebroadcasted on Euronews, we will give a good echo to these debates. Just for you to know, I mean, Euronews is distributed towards 430 million homes within the world, which means 1.2 billion people can watch Euronews, and actually every month 130 million people are consuming our brands, and 20 million every day. So welcome to the 20 million people who will assist to these fantastic debates. Thank you very much, and have a very nice day in Euronews. Thank you.
Bonjour, chers amis. Je suis heureux de vous accueillir dans cette belle langue. Malheureusement, c'est tout ce que je peux dire en français. C'est pourquoi je vais continuer le russe, ma langue maternelle. Уважая эту страну, уважая страну нашего пребывания,
respecting this country, respecting our host country, and also in respect to Euronews, which is based here, I've started my speech speaking French, but these are the only words I do know. That's what I told in French. Dear winners of the International Prize Global Energy, dear members of the selection committee, ladies and gentlemen, green, pure and renewable energy. Is it our future, or is it something which will explode in a short time? Is it our future, or these are just words of politicians which use this theme for their purposes? It is said today that green energy is too expensive compared to other sources of energy. It is said also that it exists only thanks to the public support to the tax which is paid, including by the energy companies. It is also said that the green energy sources are not that secure. This is actually true up to a certain extent, but subsidies to renewable energies are not higher than those to the non-renewable energy sources. Also, renewable energy creates hundreds of thousands of jobs. Also, they are a driver towards the innovation, and also they bring us something which will be very useful in the future and lead to decarbonization. So it is the future. And also the reports which was presented by our moderator seems very reasonable, which is based on the ideas of the prize winners and also the members of the International Selection Committee, and also different other experts. During 15 years, global energy has concluded different brainstorming sessions. Also, our energy, Fleshman Hinard, has done many interviews with experts, energy experts, and so that's how appeared the report for according the energy for the period of up to 2030. Some of the conclusions. When the energy mix to 2040, the hydrocarbons volume consumption will not change. At the end of the year, these changes would not be as radical. Up to the forecast, the solar energy will be, consumption will be 25%, and will exceed that of gas, which will be 21%. Wind energy, bioenergy, and other renewable energies will account for 40%. Also, I will draw your attention that the fusion energy will account for 11%. And today, the share of it is 0. In Cadarache, there is a reactor, a fusion reactor, which is being built now here in France. The principle that was the principle of the energy mix that was created a few years ago. It's a real concept, and it has been realized. I'd like to thank Euronews for the support in organizing this summit. I'd like also to thank Michael Peters, who not only provided this platform, but also expressed the high interest to this event, taking into account the specifics of work of Euronews. Also, I would like to express my great gratitude to the prize winners and also the members of selection committee, and wish you every success. Please look at the screen, because you will have an opportunity to get information about Global Energy Award in more details. Thank you.
I was just at home when the phone call came.
I was amazed. I didn't even know the prize existed.
The Russian embassy in Iceland called me and said that I was a possible winner. I was just speechless.
With a prize like this, all of a sudden your family thinks, oh, he did more than stay so many hours in the office.
15 years. The Global Energy Prize has turned 15 years old. In 2002, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, at the EU and Russia summit in Brussels, announced the establishment of the award to solve world power industry problems. Our country took the initiative to establish the Global Energy Prize. Over the past period, this prestigious award has reached a high level of international recognition, and outstanding scientists from numerous countries of the world have become its laureates. Many talented, enthusiastic, and committed people.
I think the prize is very important because energy is the lifeblood of economy and society. It runs through everything we do.
The Global Energy Prize, created by the Russian government and pushed by the President Putin, is a very important political push towards such a new energy, economy, environment paradigm. We call it 3E, new 3E paradigm.
We would like you to hear the story about the Global Energy Prize firsthand, from the people directly related to it. I'm really happy because it's my mission of life. The award has become really international and open. It allows to incorporate and moreover apply in our industries those researches and innovations that ultimately have become winners. The importance of the award is high, as it really allows to become, to an extent, a driver of new developments. The award is certainly a mechanism of global discussion on the development of those tasks that are set in front of the world. Laureates. Over 15 years of the award's existence, the Global Energy Prize has recognized 35 laureates from 11 countries. Laureates of the award are people who wrote their names in the history of the world science and energy field forever. Here are only a few examples. The 2011 Global Energy Prize laureate, Arthur Rosenfeld, a developer of smart energy efficient buildings. Valentin Parman got the prize for a breakthrough development of new catalysts in the area of petroleum refining and the renewable sources of energy as a principal contribution into the energy of the future.
You can see that the focus he has in terms of not only his research, but maybe the urgent feeling he had to try to be able to mobilize the other students he had and the research institutes that he's directing to kind of move society as a whole. That's quite inspirational.
Boris Katargin, the inventor of the unique RD-180 rocket engine. Something new and interesting is created, and then there happens a breakthrough, thanks to hard, diligent, everyday work. The author of a red LED, Nick Holonyak, and the inventor of a blue LED, Suji Nakamura. Their technologies allowed to start transition to energy-efficient white LED-based lighting.
In 2015, Professor Nakamura was awarded the Global Energy Prize for the invention of the blue light-emitting diode, which has become foundational for the white light-emitting diode, about 10 times better energy efficiency from that technology than the historical incandescent light bulb.
Inventions. People having made these inventions are great dreamers. They are obsessed with the idea to change the world for the better.
My father was a physics teacher, and he told me about the atom. And I was determined to study this atom a bit further.
They experience failures, but don't give up. Both the pleasure of rocket blast-off and great fails when it falls right in front of your eyes. Bring fantasy into reality.
Instead of compressing hydrogen, igniting it, you know, we did it in a very beautiful chemical way.
Rules. 3,000 experts from 90 countries have the right to nominate for the award.
It's often difficult to select the winners.
The Global Energy Prize International Award Committee consists of 20 people. These are heads of the most highly reputed scientific organizations, outstanding scientists acknowledged in the area of power industry, government and social leaders from 13 countries under the guidance of the Nobel Prize winner Rodney Allen from the UK.
I mean, the people we have on the committee are really, really world leaders in their fields. I always learn a lot whenever I talk to them.
The Global Energy Prize is an award for outstanding inventions in the global energy field, for discoveries, innovations, researches that change our world for the better.
I ideally would like to see somebody that has done something to advance fundamental knowledge around energy, and importantly, connecting that fundamental knowledge to commercialization, which is the essence of innovation.
Award. The laureates receive the Golden Medal of the Global Energy Prize, the diploma, and the honorary award pin from the hands of the President of the Russian Federation or from the person on his behalf. The monetary part of the award comprises 39 million rubles. This sum is directed on scientific research or charity. Thorstein Sigfusson from Iceland has created a joint fund together with Tomsk University with our financial support. He also helped them receive the European Union grant. Another example is our German laureate, Klaus Ridley. He has used our money to establish such a fund together with Moscow Energy University. The three most influential Russian energy companies support and finance the Global Energy Prize: Gazprom, FGC, UES, Surgutneftegas. Size. The main venue of the Global Energy Prize is by all means the popularization and development of industry research. The Global Energy Association holds additional programs for popularization of energy science among the growing generation.
I like the programs that the Global Energy has related to the educational programs they have to reach out, because without that link to society, it's just going to be something that's like a magic show that most people will not know.
The future. Receiving the Global Energy Prize is the sign of international recognition of the laureate. It is a great honor, prestige, and gale of emotions.
Most exciting moment in my life, and having the feel that at least I did a little bit for that made me pleased and also a little bit proud.
I want to support an energy superpower like Russia, which is innovating the future of energy in a very different way, which I think is one of the strongest signals that you can put out there. So I want to be part of that and to support that.
A great video introduction. Gentlemen, thank you very much. You may go and go back to your seats over there. Thank you very much for that introduction video. Fantastic and moving, and really feel that we're going to have a great discussion here. A reminder that we're live on Euronews.com as well. So there are plenty of other people watching online, as well as our audience here in Lyon today. Thanks very much for being with us. Now, unfortunately, the laureate of the 2017 Global Energy Prize couldn't be with us, Michael Gratzel. Many of you will be familiar with his work. Those of you who aren't familiar with him, please check him out, find out a little bit of information about him. He really is a legend in his field, but he is unfortunately at the International Conference on Perovskite Solar Cells and Optoelectronics in Oxford. I was going to say that the weather would be worse in Oxford than it is here in Lyon, but I think today it's probably about the same. So anyway, a great shame that he couldn't be with us. I would have loved to have met him personally. And anyway, we have a little video presentation about Michael Gratzel, which is going to tell you about why he is the winner of this award.
The Global Energy Prize is awarded annually to distinguished scientists. In 2017, Michael Gratzel became a laureate for outstanding achievements in the development of low-cost and efficient solar cells, known as Gratzel cells. Gratzel cells are relatively simple in design and cheap in production. Their output doesn't depend on the sun angle. The panels of this kind generate power even from refracted or reflected light. Gratzel cells keep working even in low-light conditions, and they are less sensitive to partial shading. They are able to work over a wide temperature range. These panels can vary in color. They can also be made transparent. That is why they can be easily integrated in buildings. There is an option to make such panels flexible, which enables designers to integrate them into clothing.
My name is Michael Gratzel, and I am a professor of physical chemistry at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. Today, I'm so delighted to express first of all, my joy and my gratitude to the selection committee of the Global Energy Prize for having awarded this prize to me this year. The future of energy development will certainly go in the direction of renewable energy growth. And we see the electric cars already arriving, and there's 1 billion cars on Earth, even more right now. So just to supply the energy to drive those cars is a huge opportunity for solar electricity. And so our research is in two areas. One, we have these very sensitized cells that now are being used already commercially. And for example, there are charging stations for electric cars that use our devices, and house facades. At this stage, we have less than 1% of the world's energy being supplied by photovoltaics. But there's a huge opportunity to come in with new ideas and next generation cells. We have to distinguish several levels here. It's a good question. One level is the technology available in these countries. Do we have enough educated, trained people, engineers, scientists, that take that up and bring it to fruition? The next question is there enough sun or wind, whatever you use as a source? Here in Switzerland, we have 30% hydroelectricity. In Canada, it's 100% hydroelectricity. And so they don't need any electric power from coal power stations or fossil power stations. It depends on what your natural conditions are, where you're strong. But I would say that for every country, there is room to make some benefits. We need to have a source of producing fuels from wind energy and from solar energy. And so that's a matter of mimicking the natural photosynthetic process. Our solar cell already mimics the light reaction, the first part, in as much as it uses a molecule to generate electric charges, like in the green leaf chlorophyll does. But what we need to go further. We need to make fuels like ethanol or methanol from sunlight and CO2 and water. Roughly speaking, the prediction is that by 2040 we have about 40% renewables. What will happen is the energy consumption will go up, but that growth has to be covered by non-conventional sources, okay, and carbon-free. Because the main issue is that conventional fossil sources, they create a greenhouse warming effect. But there is the climate problem, and so this has to be addressed. It's a very scary thing. So we are forced to go into carbon-free energy technology. And so the renewables are carbon-free. The favorable condition that happened in Germany in year 2000, when one of the parliament members, Bundestag is called in German, he came up with the idea of feed-in tariff. So he said to foster the photovoltaic energy consumption, we should pay people that have the panels more money than what the usually electricity cost is. It's called a feed-in tariff. And that set the whole field in motion, okay? It costs, of course, and it is limited. We cannot have a terawatt photovoltaic economy that is based on feed-in tariffs, because it would be too expensive, simply. But to just start it, to have a trigger, that was an excellent idea. We have a CO2 tax here in Switzerland, and that's the first thing to punish people that contribute to greenhouse warming. And I wouldn't be surprised if you think about the countries like India. They just announced by 2030 they will only have electric cars. That's 25% of the world population. And Great Britain also just announced, it's I think 10 years later, they want to have only electric cars. So once you impose, the government impose a policy, then the people will follow. The Global Energy Prize is a unique award in the sense that it supports internationally across all fields of energy. And the latest candidate who was given the award before me was Harman. He's a professor, Russian professor, and he has made pioneering conquest catalysis field. So you see, this award is not only for renewables, okay? It's across the whole field of energy, and it has a high prestige, and very importantly, it has a selection committee that is formed by the leaders in the energy field.
Some wise words there from Michael Gratzel, the laureate for this year's Global Energy Prize. Fantastic to hear him talking about the breadth of the awards as well, and the breadth of the discussion, hopefully, that we'll have here today. So that's the end of our introduction, I suppose. We can now going to move to our first part of this event that we're having here today, in which we're going to be first off talking about energy, and that will be running through to about 11:45, and when we'll have a coffee break. We'll have plenty of time for questions after the presentations by the different people on the panel here as well, and obviously we'll also be using the voting system later on as well, which should be good fun. So passing over from dye-synthesized solar cells and interesting things like that, which I would absolutely love that technology, to another great technology coming from Switzerland, our first speaker, Frédéric Baudry, who's from CERN. And when it comes to the presentations, You need to take a microphone. If you wish to stand, do so. If you wish to sit, do so. And you have a little machine over here in order to change these slides. And Mr. Baudry, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello? On? Hello, hello? Yes? Okay, thank you for this kind of introduction. Then, good morning. It's a very pleasure to be here. I would like, I would like to have a short presentation, if time is constrained, in 9 minutes, about the new technology that can help with the energy. Obviously, I will start with very, very basic statements. I think all we are sharing that. The world demand for energy, electricity is increasing. I think the use of fossil is threatening the environment and the climate. And the use of fossil fuel is not sustainable. I will go in another way about we need innovative technological solution to meet the decarbonization challenges. I think we will speak today about this, how to reduce energy consumption, what I call negawatt, and to improve energy efficiency in all the process, how you can recover the lateral energy. But also, obviously, we will speak about more and more use of renewable energy, about, I think, what is a key word is smart grid and delocalized energy storage. But I think also we have to look at development of a new large power plant that are safe, environmental clean, and economical. And today what I want to discuss with you is about fusion energy, what I think about fusion energy. Another thing, but it is linked to the nuclear energy fission, I think we will need is an accelerator-driven system that to transmute the waste. Starting with nuclear energy, it works. Today you can look at the sun in spite of that. I think fusion is existing. We are benefiting of fusion energy because life on the Earth is due to things. What is more difficult is how to reproduce this fusion process on Earth and to produce energy. I think we know that fusion with light element is possible. With deuterium and tritium, the main problem is to reach a very high temperature and to confine the plasma we obtain with that, because no any material in the world can withstand this close to 200 millions of degrees. And I think we are now developing more and more magnetic confinement or inertial confinement. Magnetic confinement, we know with the tokamak or stereolator is working. Now, what is the goal? The goal is for a long time, it was a big improvement with different projects in research. But I think now we reach a quick, sometimes a break-even, to have the point where the energy supply equals the energy output. But now what we have to go is the next goal is the ignition. And this was mentioned already, is the goal of ITER, this tokamak built in Cadarache, but it is a global organization with all the main companies. And you can see the evolution of the size of the tokamak. And I think now ITER will be the way to demonstrate the fusion, but no electrical energy on the grid. And what should be the next one is a demo, what it is I think one, but I think I will say more demo in the world to attach the fusion energy to the grid. I just want to remember that in 2006, it was a global energy prize for 3 people from ITER and the fusion energy. I think for me, to conclude very quickly, I think for me, we know it could work. We know now we are at the level of fusion no more in fundamental research, but applied research. I think what we need is more investment in these kind of technologies, material science, to take care about this high energy neutron 14 MeV. But I think for me, we need really more investment, and we don't need only one experiment as ITER, and we have to think to have a fast track and to develop maybe one demo per continent. I will come back in my final conclusion to that. We have, and I am in the domain at CERN, we are developing accelerator. Now more and more we have high power proton accelerator with use for fundamental research, particle physics, nuclear physics, but also neutron source due to the proton beam inspiration source. And this can be used for transmutation of long-lived nuclear waste. We have now more and more this kind of proton project. I put on the slide several ones, the SNS in Oak Ridge in US, already in operation for several years. One in G-Park in Japan, FRIB in US, but also in construction in Europe, ESS, European Spallation Source, that will be starting in the year 2020 or around. And also, as I mentioned, this project IFMIF should be in Japan to test all the material for fusion. Then we have a long tradition of now proton things, and I think we can use this for the waste transmutation. I think when we are looking now in the fission with spent nuclear fuel, we have all this waste, especially this minor actinide, that which is maybe the small volume, but represent in terms of activities main things and dominated by long-term lifetime. I will not go in the process of ADS and how to transmute, but I think we are ready to invest, because I think to have a distributed ADS system where we can transmute waste of fission with reduce the volume by 2 orders of magnitude and lifetime by 3 orders of magnitude could be a good opportunity for the humankind. One example is a MIRA project as a ADS demonstrator in Europe. I think it's one of the Europe, and I will mention several ones in other continents. I think this is demonstration. I think this is a direct use of high energy proton and to demonstrate the ADS concept in the transmutation. I think what we have to push is to push faster this kind of project, because for time being the time constraints are depressing. Then in terms of summary for this part, I think I would say that nuclear waste management is complex and long-term, but I think in spite of that, nuclear fission is with us. It will not disappear tomorrow. It will take maybe several decades. And I think it's very important to have numerous in the world ADS program. I think already we have a large effort, but not very coordinated, not a very evident strategy in Europe, China, India, Japan. I think also in Russia, because they are discussing to have a small demonstration in Troyes. Okay, I will conclude that. I think for me, my presentation it was to say we need more aggressive R&D on fusion and ADS program. I think we need more investment to reduce what we call the depressing time scale. I think for me, really to put all in one basket for ITER is also something we have to try to avoid. And I will be addressed that we need, for example, one demo per continent to address several technologies. I think also in EDS, we need really to push this and to have more global cooperation as we are doing for fusion, and maybe to define a global strategy and a roadmap to join all the effort we have on different continents. I would say that nowadays it's no more fundamental research, but it's more applied research and technology department. And I think this we are not to compete and to have a competition, damaging competition between fundamental research and this kind of research for energy. We should maybe think how, it will be maybe the second topic of the day, where can come the money from Ministry of Industry, taxes on fossil energies. But I think we have to drive this energy, but not in competition with other domains. Okay, we'll finish with 2 quotes. And I want to thank for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I look forward to coming back to that in the Q&A as well later on, because lots of questions about that, I'm sure. Our next speaker is Mr. Dominik Fasch, Global Energy Prize expert, chairman of the board of the Russian Technology Foundation. Mr. Fasch, the floor is yours.
Merci. Thank you very much. Merci is going to be my only word in French, unfortunately. You know, the Frenchmen usually were in France and we have to speak Russian, English, or whatever. Okay, anyway. I have to comment probably where I'm coming from. The first 20 years of my life I spent not so far from here in Sophia Antipolis in creating what is known as the best and probably the biggest technopark in Europe. And then I moved to Russia, where I became the CEO of Schlumberger. I was in the board of SUEC, the coal company, and I was the head of Enel when they did the famous privatization of ROES. Actually, I'm in Kazakhstan, a member of the board of the grid of Kazakhstan. I was also the member of the market council in Russia, a country where probably there's no market, but that's another story. I would like to address a few questions about the threat and the opportunities we have in energy from a point of view of somebody who has been involved in the real, not in the research, but in the real management of a big energy company in the oil and gas or in the electricity production in Russia. And I would start with the threats, and I would start for a very short comment. My daughter was in Miami a week ago, and I was really wondering what's going to happen. So, I mean, life is coming to us with real peculiar problems of survival linked to the energy transition, linked to the climate story, and I'm going to come back on that. But I would like to start with the nuclear power. We used to live in a world of certitudes in the last century. We were building, for instance, France was building with de Gaulle and Giscard the French nuclear problem for a long time, for 40, 50 years, and we have a problem now of the closing of the first generation of the nuclear facility. We had Fukushima, and now, for instance, in France, the government is saying we have to reduce probably from 78, 75 to 50% of nuclear, which means the closing of around 20 nuclear facility in France. So nuclear, we know what's happening in Japan. We know what's happened in Germany, the closing of 22 nuclear blocks in Germany. That's a big question mark. So we are switching from a century of certitudes in a century of uncertainty today. We don't know what are going to be our mix. Listening very, I was interested with Igor prognosis. I mean, nobody really can say what's going to be the mix, not even at the end of this century, but in the middle of it, there's a big question mark. The second threat is the reality is coal. We know what President Trump said about defending the jobs in this area. The reality today is that half of the electricity generated in the world is produced on coal. And the increasing use of energy is basically coming from China and from India. They are not 50, they are 75, 80% of coal. So we have a deep contradiction here, and deep contradiction we are facing in the Paris Agreement, for instance, how to reduce the production of coal if we want to reduce the CO2. What is going to be the price of the ton of CO2 if we really want to address this question? That's also a big threat. I want to mention here quite interesting contribution of Professor Tainter about the civilization, the complexity, and the energy collapse in the civilization. That's very interesting. If you are, there is several conference in YouTube. It's even more interesting than Jared Diamond about the civilization. How much complexity, which is in our society, address the energy use in our society, and how much is it one of the reasons of the fall of some society. He has very interesting issues. I cannot speak very longly about that, but I recommend this. The climate story, you see the production of CO2, you see the production of US, you see the production of China, you see clearly where is the problem today. I think France has been doing a big contribution in the Paris Agreement, but today we have really several questions, including the Trump question, how much in the United States. We know there is different position coming from the industry in the States around this question, but that's going to be a key question. It's not going to solve the problem. It's going to keep them under control, which is already a big step in the future. One of the big threats I want to emphasize here, and a few people talk about that, it's our energy systems are under threat of hacking. As the member of the board of a big company, a great company in Kazakhstan, I'm trying to develop the defense of this. We are trying, and we have to understand that trying to improve what they call the smart city, smart grid, smart meter, and I was in Schlumberger, one of the probably leaders on this, is also creating opportunity for hacking. So we have to defend our position on this, and we have to understand that terrorism is not only, unfortunately, a truck in Nice, but is also this possibility of them to intrude our energy distribution, electricity distribution. And we have to get prepared on that. It's a real fight of this century. The last one, the last threat is geopolitics. You have all the examples that I remember a conference I made in Gazprom a few years ago, and I said, you know, the story of the energy is like chercher la femme. The famous French saying about chercher la femme. It's not exactly chercher la femme, c'est chercher le pipe. Look after the pipe, and then you will understand the situation. And the example I gave was Ukraine before the story in Ukraine. I wrote a famous article in Le Monde in 2006 and saying we have all the premises of a big issue, and the problem happened. So today, if you have a situation, you look at Syria, you cannot understand Syria if you don't understand the Qatar story on gas, the competition between the US and so on. Everywhere you have a story which is linked with energy, with the transition of energy, transmission of energy, pipes, and so on. If you look at the story of Chechnya, it was famous. The story of Ukraine is also very famous on this. I want to get back to the story of ITER that my friend Audrey commented. I'm a little bit less enthusiastic, less optimistic on this story. I'm very supportive to the format. If really some of our key countries, Europe, United States, China, Russia, everybody is supporting a project, that's fantastic. So I like very much the format, the idea in our world today where we have so many conflicts, so many contradictions, that the people get together for a positive goal, for investing in science and technology. I have some doubts about the commercial issue of ITER. And my point was, what if we invest a little bit more, not putting all our eggs in the same basket and investing more, for instance, in storage? I think storage is a key issue, because if we solve the problem of storage, we solve the problem of renewables. And we solve also a lot of problems of decentralization today of energy, which is one of the factors. If you look at the map of Denmark today, there was 25 points of producing energy. Today there is 2,500 points. So this decentralization is a fact, and storage is a big step to be solved. And frankly speaking, if some team in the world, we should give them a double global energy prize. Igor, it's for you. So the opportunities, the technology, we have a certain form of acceleration in developing, you know, the famous Moore law about the microchips. We have an acceleration of technologies. So we think, I think that we are going to solve some of our problems quicker than we think. We are going to come several solutions. One of the solutions is what we call the smart technology, smart metering. So you have the change. It's not an old meter. It's a double-way meter. You have the possibility about the customer becoming not only a user but also a player. You have the possibility to have the virtual kilowatt, which is going to be the kilowatt you are not going to produce. So it's very interesting. Not far from here, there is a very nice little company called Energy Pool, which is basically working on demand aggregate and having this solution to resell to the producer the kilowatt he has not to produce. As a generator, I remember the most expensive kilowatt is the last 5%, because they are golden kilowatt. If you don't produce them, you make a substantial economy. One of the positive opportunity is the Paris Climate Agreement. It's heavily linked to politics, so I don't know really what's going to happen, but that's finally the main countries got together to make an agreement on this. We will also see what's going to happen, but there is, in this opportunity, the electric transport. But you have to remember, okay, fine, if the Chinese announce that they are going to, for 2050, to go to completely 100% on electricity transport, it's also a problem. Where's the electricity is going to come from? If it's coming from coal generation, you still have the problem. So we should think about that. About the renewables, there is some prognosis saying that in 2050 we should be 100% on renewables. It's going to be competitive enough. I'm not completely sure, linked with the great, the great problems. For instance, in Germany, they have the renewables on north, and they have the consumer in the south, and they have a great problem. They have to go to France to get the electricity. So this is an opportunity which makes sense with the solution on storage issue. And we have also, and that's my last point, some of the change in the energy world are going to happen on the business model. We will have to change the business model of acting in energy. So basically, I'm saying sometimes that some of the big elephants are dead. They don't know about that. It's not the story of Enron. Enron was a specific story, but some of the big elephants in this business have to think about the future. The last acquisition of Total was a battery, SAFT. It was not in oil and gas. So the big energy player have to think about their future, and they have a problem because they are big elephant. And elephants are not really good in dancing tango. It's making innovation. That the small and medium-sized company, we are going to build the future of our energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm just thinking of the elephant there dancing tango. That image stays with me for a while. Great. Some really interesting points to come back to there. Thank you, Mr. Fash. It's now the chance for Stephen Griffith, who is the Global Energy Prize International Award Committee member, Interim Executive Vice President for Research at Khalifa University of Science and Technology, and Vice President for Research and Associate Provost at Masdar Institute. That's a long job title already. I'm sure there are many others as well. Mr. Griffith, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you to the Global Energy Association for inviting me. Thank you to Euronews for hosting this great event. Today I'll be talking about energy innovation and some of the key technologies and trends that we're seeing. I think as an important background to the discussion, we need to think about greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases, as we're aware, they relate to global warming, and they relate to climate change through global warming. As we consider global warming and greenhouse gases, we know from science that if we're to avoid the global average temperature staying below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, we need to try to keep our carbon budget within 900 gigatons. Now, this budget will be expended within 25 years at the current rate at which we are emitting carbon dioxide, primarily from industry and energy. So we need a strategy. And the strategy, I think, is best understood by taking a look at the components of what the carbon dioxide emissions from energy are made of. So one, we look at the population. Population growth is a key component. Income or economic growth per person on the planet, or GDP per capita. Thirdly, we have the energy expended per unit of economic growth, energy per GDP. Fourth is the carbon dioxide per unit of energy. Now, going into the next couple decades, we are going to have strong population growth, 20% increase, about 9 billion people on the planet, and that's fairly certain. In a good way, we'll have economic growth. So the GDP per capita will rise across the globe to about $28,000 per person. That's also good. So what can we do strategically in order to try to deal with carbon dioxide? One is energy productivity, and the second is decarbonization of energy. When we look at decarbonization of energy, we can look at fuels and we can look at power. These fuel and power, they provide energy to end-use sectors. It's in the buildings, commercial, residential buildings, industry, and transportation. When we consider where the primary fuels that are renewable are located, it's usually with power. So that's a great opportunity when we start to think about decarbonization, is to go for power first. And the good news is, today, because of innovations we've already seen, particularly in solar and wind energy, we have half of all new power capacity globally coming from renewables, which is good. And this trend is believed to continue, and so that's a very positive factor. However, as the share of renewables continue to increase, there will be challenges. We know that renewable energy, particularly those that have the most innovation behind them, solar and wind, they're intermittent. So therefore, we're going to have to think about how the energy system will balance to deal with this intermittency. And so there's different innovations that are coming, which we have to leverage. One is going to be demand flexibility. So whether you curtail or you shift a load, you have to try to use that strategy to deal with intermittency of renewables. Secondly, and very importantly, as mentioned already, electric chemical energy storage or thermal energy storage, some way to store energy so it can be used at other times. The third is, and being used very well in Europe, is transmission system interconnection. So seeing how we can transport and meet supply and demand and balance that through having differences in available supply and demand. And fourthly is we will have a fossil energy system which will stay with us to support the renewable energy through perhaps natural gas-fired backup generation. So this is a very good story. Based on this story, what the optimistic forecasts tell you is that our current energy system, which is about 24,000 terawatt hours, largely today based on hydrocarbon, will go through a transformation in the coming decades where we may see more than 6,000 gigawatts of new energy in the form of solar and wind in particular, other renewables, coming into the system, being deployed in places like China and India where there's great demand growth, and ultimately transforming the energy system to one which is much cleaner in 2040, for instance, where we may see up to 38,000 terawatt hours of electricity produced, but much of that coming from clean energy, not just solar and wind, but also we take into account hydro and nuclear. So with this, it's fairly clear that decarbonization, I think, is a trend that's happening. It will continue, and it's, so to speak, the low-hanging fruit. The question is, what about energy productivity, which is probably even the more important question to consider. And so with energy productivity, one of the things we like to think about is this digital transformation happening globally. As you see here, The Economist, I think it's a very relevant statement. The world's most valuable resource is no longer oil, but data. And given the trends we're seeing, it's very true. If you look at data, just like oil, you need to refine it to extract the maximum value from it when it's produced in large amounts. In the energy sector, we can consider digitalization as an opportunity to develop new technologies which allow us to enhance energy productivity by providing higher levels of service per unit of energy consumed, by allowing us to have more economic activity per unit of service level. These two on my right hand, I guess your right hand or left hand side, the two factors of energy productivity, which are, to give an example, take the autonomous vehicle. The autonomous vehicle, as it comes, may be able to travel 1 mile or 1 kilometer using less energy. In that same mile or kilometer, the person traveling may be able to do more work. Therefore, you're getting a big boost in the amount of economic activity per unit of energy consumed by these two different factors which come into play with digitalization. Now, digitalization, there's other ways to describe it. I think one example I commonly use is the following. We're able to now sense from people, places, and things a great deal of data. We collect the data, and then we connect these data to data repositories, analytical systems, which gives us a tremendous situational awareness and also starts to allow us to understand things, to take actions on the future. And so the very sophisticated term is cybernetics, but quite simply, it's an unprecedented ability to sense, analyze, and actuate the world around us, which is very powerful. Now, the question is this already happening? I think the Global Clean Tech 100 is just one example, 2017. There were several trends pointed out. They were very interesting to me because they're so focused on digital. So one trend was the Internet of Everything. So it's this ubiquitous connectivity of energy system components all the time. The second trend that was pointed out was distributed, digital, and flexible energy systems. And so we look at connecting distributed parts of the energy system together and having them able to adequately match and balance supply and demand real time. That's the distribution and the opportunity through digitalization. When we look at the particular companies, I won't go through all these 100 companies, there were a couple trends I think were kind of interesting to point out. I'll just circle them on the screen. The IoT enablers, these are companies, they're in clean energy, but they're doing things like providing low-power, wide-area networks to connect energy system together. Then there's the companies, there's in the blue here, that are the IoT Internet of Things data analyzers. They're providing systems to help analyze massive amounts of data being generated. Then there are in red, the intelligent building providers. Very interesting, going far beyond just optimizing energy efficiency, bringing into the optimization personal productivity, looking at the health of people, looking at real estate value. It's a joint co-optimization using IoT as a platform. And then finally, there's the distributed energy providers. So this is very important because personal power, community power in developed and developing worlds is something that's really become quite a trend and is being enabled by this notion of IoT and distributed digital and flexible systems. When we take it all together, we can now think about the intelligent system which is distributed to help us increase energy productivity in a decarbonized way. For example, you might have the electric vehicle, shared autonomous electric vehicle, providing mobility or transportation on demand, powered by clean energy, and having a battery which is providing energy storage not just for the car itself, but also providing electricity storage for the grid to help with some of that balancing I've talked about. So this is certainly a very disruptive possibility, but it wouldn't be possible without the final thing I'll mention as far as technologies is the electrochemical energy storage. We talked about batteries. So a major trend that's happened and something that will continue is in the past 7 years, the cost of the lithium-ion battery pack has fallen from about $1,000 per kilowatt hour to less than $200 per kilowatt hour in certain places. So it's a dramatic reduction in the cost of energy storage. This trend is believed to continue far into the future to get well below $100 per kilowatt hour in energy storage at a battery pack level for lithium-ion, because we'll have innovations to improve energy density of storage. Now, when this happens, as you can see from these charts, the transportation electric vehicles are going to become much more cost-effective and very much able to compete with cars with internal combustion engines. Likewise, we will have battery storage available for the electrical grid to help with some of those challenges I talked about, intermittency. And the battery storage come from the battery pack as well as the vehicles which battery packs can provide storage for. So it's quite transformative. So I'll close. I think Shell is a nice summarization here. I like this because what you see is the opportunity for innovation in energy to help us with energy productivity and decarbonization. What Shell said in their 2016 sustainability report was that in the pre-industrial area, we were a renewable-powered society, renewable energy-based society, biomass-based. Then we went to more energy-dense fuels. We look at coal, we look at oil, we look at gas. Now we can essentially come full circle, the way this plot's developed, and start to leverage modern renewable energy, other forms of modern energy, clean energy, to be able to come back in this century and base our society on a decarbonized and very energy productive system. So thank you. I appreciate that and look forward to the following discussions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths. Interesting to see some of the themes that are coming out that are common between the speeches that we've had so far. Our next speaker, you've already seen him actually in the introductory video this morning, Mr. Valentin Parmon, who won the Global Energy Prize in 2016. He's the scientific director at the Boryskov Institute of Catalysis of the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences.
Thank you.
It should be fine.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and indeed this is very large honor for me to attend this meeting here for Euronews. And first of all, I would like to explain what is the area of science I represent here. Well, I represent Catalysis, and as to the word Catalysis, maybe it is not very well known for some people, much more known as word catalyst. This is something increasing, improving, and so on. But as to real term catalyst, this is chemical concept. And for those who are not chemists, the easiest way is to explain that catalyst is a magic wand which makes it possible to give conversion of something, some substances into the needed products. And catalysis is the method of the utilization of catalyst. And as to the importance of catalysis, this is very serious problem, and because of catalysts and catalytic technologies control product quality, possibility to use viable resources of raw material, also energy saving, as well as ecological, environmental problems. And as to the impact of catalysis in industrial countries, more than 30% of GDP in large countries like United States are produced using catalysts. The traditional interaction of catalysis with energy is very large. First of all, this is indeed a conversion of fossil resources like petrochemistry or refinery. This is the use of not so conventional resources like natural gas, like gas condensate, as well as to resolve some problems of the environmental cleaners of energetic power plants and so on. Indeed, catalysis deal with many problems of future energetics, like generation of the clean energy from not very clean resources like coal, then the utilization of renewable plant biomass, and so on. And I would like to make only a few statements and about expectations of our sector of chemistry related to the large scale of energy sector. First of all, indeed, chemical energy carriers like hydrocarbons and possibly hydrogen will dominate as main energy carriers like motor or jet fuels for at least till the mid of this century. Also, the structure of the motor fuel consumption will change considerably in the coming decade, and we expect a diminishing the consumption of gasoline due to scaling up the utilization of electric cars. But let me make a comment that the most serious problem for nowadays is the storage of electric energy, and storage of electric energy is mainly chemical problem too. So the problem of nanostructured materials. Much more renewable feedstock, such as plant biomass, will be used for the production of green motor and jet fuels. This is inevitably. And much effort will be made to convert not traditional or untractable carbon-containing fossils into synthetic petroleum for utilization at the existing refinery facilities. And indeed, some photoelectrochemical and photocatalytic systems will be with reasonable economic characteristics will be developed in the coming decades. And the Global Energy Prize to Mikhail Gratzel demonstrate this. And indeed, it is of value for me to mention that Lyon city is the main city in France which is dealing with catalysis. Because of here, there is location of the Institute of Catalysis, which has more than half-century history. as well as main industrial institution like Institut de Pétrole de France is located also here in Lyon. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and interesting, and it's going to be interesting to come back to you with some questions later on. I'll go to our last speaker in this energy segment of this summit meeting, and that is going to be Mr. Klaus Riedler, who's a laureate of the Global Energy Prize back in 2005. We saw him in the video again this morning as well. He's a former member of the VDI GEU Advisory Board, Professor, Dr. Engineer. Mr. Riedler, the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me here, and also to Euronews to let me make my rather conservative statements. Energy is the key to multiplying the forces of mankind, mental and physical ones. So it's not surprising that the output of our economy depends strongly on the use of energy. And also our standard of living depends strongly on our energy use. Just think what happens if the electricity is off or the gas station on strike. Despite serious efforts by the industrialized countries to save energy, the energy will still increase in the next 20 years by about 1.3% because the developing countries do request their share in that economic growth. And when you look at the right-hand side, it tells you, yes, renewables are growing the strongest with about 8% in a linearized form, and all renewables, not only solar and wind, but also biomass, hydro, will be growing. But still, this graph tells us by 2030, more than 70% of primary energy, I'm not only talking about power, will be fossil. Now, actually, we do not care by which primary energy our services are supplied, like a heated home, a lighted desk, a moving car, as long as this use of energy fulfills the energy triangle requests, that is, security of supply, economy of the supply, and also environmental protection. If we look into the future, fossil fuels will be available 100, coal even 1,000 years, but we have concerns about the environmental impact. Renewables are plentiful, but there are concerns about their security of supply and also about the price. So technology is needed and has made great progress to help to avoid those concerns, but it hasn't resolved all of them. A big issue is energy efficiency. And just looking back, my first little car took about, a small one, 10 liters per 100 kilometers. Nowadays, I'm driving a faster, larger one with 6 liters. A light bulb takes about 6 times the energy of a LED light. And to bring an example out of my own personal professional life, gas turbines, in the last 25 years, combined cycle plants have improved their efficiency by 10 percentage points, which means a relative improvement of about 20%. And it's no secret that all the suppliers are working on efficiency maybe in the range of 63%. But technologies have also made a great improvement in the use of renewables, mostly, however, in power. The first windmills had about 30 years ago a power of 30 kilowatts with blades, which you still could transport in a VW bus. Nowadays, we are at powers 100, 200 times larger, and the blade span is as wide as a B747. At the same time, if you look at the last 10 years,
photovoltaics have become down in price maybe by a factor of 3. So this is really good news. However, when I speak about primary energy, the problem is that renewables have made little impact on domestic heating, a little bit of geothermal, a little bit of biomass. In industry, their contribution is limited because no factory would work if the power goes off too often. And in terms of mobility, yes, the EU has a target of 10% of biofuels, while Brazil is already way beyond that. So it is an intriguing question if we are talking about primary energy, not only about power, what will be the contribution of renewables in 2050? And I have picked that interesting graph because it shows the optimistic views of groups like green power, which go up to 50 to 80% in 2050. And the more conservative ones like the International Energy Agency and, for example, Exxon, come only up to 20 to 30%. So it is a big question, where will it go? Now our governments do force us into decarbonizing our economies as quickly as possible. Now personally, I am in favor to do all the research needed to improve technologies, efficiency, make fossil power more efficient, make renewables more less costly, solve the question of storage. But, and now I'm, as the last speaker, I'm provoking a little bit. I will excuse myself with my colleagues. If we look at the threat of man-made climate change, we rely on the predictions summarized in the Bible, the reports of the International Panel of Climate Change. And they are all based on computer simulation. Now, if I take out of the last report this graph, all those thin little blue lines are about 100 calculations taken by IPCC. And if you continue them till 2100, they arrive at temperatures 3, 4, 5 degrees above today. And in the same graph, IPCC has plotted what is the present measured history. And if some of my engineers had come up to me with a comparison between model simulation and data, I would have said, you better go back and think twice about that. So I encourage rather objective evaluations because gigantic amounts of money are spent on there, and any country should or only has the money once to go into its future energy system. So I would advocate to make those assessments as careful, because it was said energy is a complex system. So to make sudden changes as decarbonizing is, we should understand how does it impact the existing system, and do we have the technologies available, or are we confident to have it available in the next 10, 15 years, for example, like storing power. So I would be careful to take predictions, binding predictions, 40 years into the future, just by thinking back those predictions in 1980. How accurately did they meet today's scenario? So with this, I would encourage, yes, move as fast as we can. In industry, we had the target set something where you want to be 10 years into the future, and then set your resources, personnel, technologies for the next 2 to 3 years. And then after that period, ask yourself, how far have you achieved? or how much have you achieved, and have the boundary conditions changed? For example, has fusion become reality? And only then move ahead with the next 10-year target, because as I said before, energy is too important a system to play around with different options. Nobody can afford them. Thank you.
Marvellous. Thanks very much, Mr. Riedler, for that speech with some interesting points as well. It's now time for us to go to our Q&A session, where people from the audience here will be able to ask some questions as well. I wanted to be greedy and take the first question myself, which is that storage came up a lot in a lot of those presentations. Is there an outstanding technology in energy storage that anybody can name, can describe, that they think has a lot of promise for solving the problem that we have, or do we basically not really have any options on the table in front of us? Take a mic if you can.
Well, no, I think the storage, so the graphs I showed with the lithium-ion battery, I mean, that's a technology that's being pursued aggressively to bring down the cost. I think for electric vehicles and for grid storage, we're going to see the scale that's being pursued by the companies that are trying to develop batteries will bring down the cost to the extent that we'll certainly see an uptake of electric vehicles based on electrochemical energy storage happening. Grid scale battery storage is not happening just yet. So I think that's yet to come, and so there will be other forms of storage that we have to complement with. One thing I'm particularly optimistic about that we're doing in the UE is concentrated solar power thermal energy storage. It's, you know, the power block there is a proven technology. We're running with cycles we understand, and we're using thermal storage from solar energy, and so that's a good large scale.
Can you explain to me what that is?
So you, what you do is you capture sun from a concentrated solar power apparatus. So you have different forms. You have parabolic troughs, you have towers. You then put the heat from the sun into, it can be a salt, it can be any kind of, it can be a solid state storage, and then you can dispatch that heat to produce steam or whatever is the fluid, working fluid for a power block, and produce electricity just like you would from traditional hydrocarbon-based electricity. So that is because the technology on the power side is proven, and you can have very large-scale thermal storage. It's very good for the grid today, and it's something I think could be scaled up further. So that's one interesting grid storage opportunity to complement battery storage as we develop the technology to bring the cost down, which is going through the route, I think, of electric vehicles fairly sharply. The final that I would mention on storage is when you get to very high level of renewable energy intermittency, it's not just day-to-day, hour-to-hour, week-to-week. You have to worry about season-to-season storage. And so something we've looked at is if you're trying to bring the cost of the system down to the lowest possible level, you may, and it's going to be based on solar energy, you may need to be able to store the solar energy produced in a very sunny time of the year where the demand is not that high, store that for a whole season. And you don't do that with batteries, and you don't do that necessarily even with thermal storage from a concentrated solar power. So there you might use electrolysis to produce hydrogen or other energy-dense carriers that can be held for a long time, and then use that energy in another time of the year. So storage has many different flavors. The electrochemical is very exciting. It's happening, but I wouldn't say everything will be a battery. There's other ways to look at it, and we have to consider that in our storage perspective.
Anybody else got anything to say on storage?
Well, may I add something? Approximately 2 decades ago, I was a leader of international team of experts to prepare foresight for International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. This is the main chemical, IUPAC, the main chemical society. And that foresight was named Chemistry for the Energy Future. And we checked the possibility of different energy carriers in the special respect for Earth, for our atmosphere. And indeed, it appeared that liquid hydrocarbons are the best storage of energy for Earth. Maybe for future hydrogen, but as to hydrogen, there are some very serious problems for its storage, receiving, it's a secondary energy carrier and so on. And indeed, moreover, as to the energy storage, this is the subject which depends very much on the particular situation of the country. For example, as to the country with very dense population, indeed electricity will be the better choice. But for large countries like, for example, Russia is, China is, Canada is, Brazil, indeed liquid chemical carriers are the best one. So the development in this area will go on in different ways for different countries.
Michael Gratzel talked about that a little bit
yes,
in his presentation
but
too.
Anyhow, the slogan "green chemistry" is a leading slogan for nowadays chemistry in all, including catalysis.
Let me make 2 comments. For electric energy, pumped hydro storage has been a very efficient means, but we will never be able to build up capacities which are really needed if renewables are a week or 2 weeks off. So I concur with Valentin saying gas or electricity to gas or to liquid can make a large, very large contribution. It can be stored. At present, however, the efficiency to bring electricity via gas or liquid back to electricity has an efficiency of 30–35% at best, and it's expensive. But if you think to bring power into liquid and then feed this into the mobility market, there the prices are different and you might be able to do better. For the other parts of primary energy demand, some utilities in Germany build gigantic water tanks and heat them with excess renewable power to temperatures 60, 70, 80 degrees, hope to bring it into the cold season and from there feed it back into the system. But again, it's a rather antique technology and its efficiency is also not too good, but nothing better is available.
Okay, let's go out to the audience here for
Can I make just
yeah,
a short, one short remark?
Yeah.
2 remarks. One is based on economy, coming from somebody who has the experience of the market. If you look at the market, sometimes you come up with negative price because there is no storage. So, you know, it's like, it's like the financial world coming up with negative rates. So you have to solve this issue. You're coming with a negative price. What you do when you're a generator, you know? So the storage is also an economic issue for the balance of the market. And the second remark would be I remember I made a proposal to Igor for the Global Prize to give it to Elon Musk, because he's really the first one who made a breakthrough in the industry, not in the theoretical research or whatever, to build this factory of battery in the US. And it's going to be the first one. It's a fantastic challenge because it's a huge bet on the future, but he is doing the first step in the industry, not only in the theoretical research.
And if you can manage to bring Elon Musk here as well, that would be great. We'd love to have him on Euronews. We can have a nice chat with him, have an afternoon with Elon. Let's open up to some questions. Who would like to? There's somebody going around with a microphone, so if you'd like to put your hand up, tell us who you are, where you're from, and give us your question. No volunteers? There we go.
Hello, Rumi Vakirelska. I'm an independent journalist in New Europe. Just a wider question. Decarbonization globally seems to be very political. We just even heard another breakdown I haven't heard before about how we choose to decarbonize between small and big countries, which probably has an economic reason, but raises questions. So how do we depoliticize decarbonization in energy supply?
How do you depoliticize this decarbonisation. Stephen?
So it's a good question. I think and the rationales for decarbonization, something that I do believe strongly in is you need to have a market approach to trying to get things started. What's very good about the power sector, and particularly utility scale solar and wind, the price today, when you keep the shares of these down to a reasonable level, 20%, 30% of the power system, you're very, very competitive on a purely economic basis to bring up the level of renewable to something that is certainly enhancing sustainability. Likewise, in energy efficiency, when I get into the discussion of IoT and we talk about other things, what's nice about this again, rather than starting from the top down and saying we're doing this because we have a climate concern, let people adopt the technology which enhances their lives. And so when I look at the buildings, sometimes the argument we have to make is that the energy cost is maybe $3 per foot squared or something of this sort. Then you look at the value of the people and you look at the value of the real estate, it goes up by an order of magnitude to the real estate to the people. So if you create systems which enhance the way your workers behave and enhance the value of your real estate and the energy efficiency like I talked about and this joint optimization happening through digitalization, it's purely an economic rationale. It's something that really can stimulate lots of energy productivity and really well complement decarbonization that can happen on a purely economic basis from renewables. So when you get to, I think we have a long way to go before we're tapped out with a purely economic rationale for increasing sustainability. And then, of course, you have to start to push toward things like carbon prices and these more politically motivated topics, which are, they may or may not happen because of all the things that have to come together to make them work.
So you're saying the best way to talk to politicians is to talk to them about the economic angle and not to appeal to their sense of altruism and looking forward to the future to try and help the planet. In fact, if you talk to them about numbers, you're going to sell it better.
See, that's exactly right. And I think the challenge is sometimes when you start from, it's good to be green, switch people off. They think it's not economical, it's expensive, why would we do this? But when you start as a balance, it's good to do this, and it also has an economic rationale that makes sense today. Then you get the adoption going, people see how it works. You get to a large share of renewables, lots of energy efficiency. By that time, maybe people are more switched on to adopting this view of how we can help the planet. So you got to get it going somehow. I think the economics is one way to do that.
Anybody else got another view on depoliticizing or decoupling that connection?
Just an additional remark. The international community did agree that developing countries, countries like India, China, may be using fossil energies for many years into the future, 10, 20, 30 years. So by then also their economy, their technology should have become strong enough that they can develop their solution for their own country themselves. So giving every country the chance to come up with its technology level would take part of the political part of the pressure out.
Any other comments?
It's going to be a very short comment to answer the question. It's heavily going to depend on the price of ton of CO2. $0, $20, $100. Will there be a market? And you know what happened with the first tentative of the market? There was a big screw in France on the VAT story. So it's heavily going to depend. Is there going to be a market, and what's going to be the price of a CO2 ton?
Any other questions?
Hi, as we are in Lyon, I would like to mention something which is a few kilometers away from here. It's the Museum of Old Automobile Cars. And there is a model built 110 years ago, which is an electrical model of cars. And this model has a 40 minutes autonomy. So my question is, did we miss a lot of train of opportunity to have a new system, for example, for car engines, And do you see in the future, this is a second question, an opportunity of combining several sources of energies? I just back from Iceland. I've seen that there they are doing this. Of course, for industry, it's too early. Perhaps it's impossible, perhaps, but at least for domestic needs, is it possible to have a combination of several sources of energies?
So 2 questions there from Claudia. I'm one of my science journalist colleagues here at Euronews. Did we miss the boat a bit on electrification of the transport systems? If the electrical cars in the museum 100 years ago, have we just been too slow? First off.
Well, indeed, we appreciate very much increasing the amount of electric cars. But nevertheless, as to my area of science, Catalysis is trying to improve both the environmental cleanness of strict conventional engines with internal combustion, as well as to diminish their pollution. And let me report that now there are systems which have the combination of the conventional engines with internal combustion and some catalytic devices, we call that fuel processors, which allow to achieve the efficiency of the energy utilization nearly the same as for at least hybrid electric cars, hybrid cars. So it's possible. Now different areas of science are competing. This is a challenge for any area of science. And maybe in 10 or maybe 20 or 50 years, the best will be not electric cars, but something different. Let us see.
I have a friend who bought an electric car in the States. And price obviously doesn't hurt him. And with your comment that the batteries will come down by a factor of 10, maybe that argument goes away. But then he made a joke. He said, it's pleasant to sit in a restaurant and wait till the car is recharged to go another 150 miles. Now this is an attitude enjoyable for him, but until we resolve this issue, then I guess people will be reluctant to go in an electric car.
On the question of combining different types of sources, energy sources.
I want to finish about the car.
Yeah, go on.
For me, I want to say, do we need cars? Do we still need cars? Do we still need individual cars? I think for me, maybe the problem will be solved very soon, because I've just come from a trip in Beijing. In spite we have a car with fuel or with, it's impossible to drive. I think nowadays, for me, autonomy of car maybe is not a real problem. In the big city, we need not individual car. We need, I think, what is nowadays in Lyon, yesterday I saw, and in Paris I'm using a lot, Autolib, renting car, not to have, but I think we have to finish with the notion to have your own individual car. I think we have to change the concept, because I think with the growth of population, it's completely paradox to get our own car. I think we have to change the things, and I think for the car, we will not need, we will not miss energy. We will need, we are missing of place and traffic. I think we will need a chair car, electrical car in the city, and to have fast transport between cities. And I think the car, I can bet in 50 years we have no more individual cars.
Do you think you can persuade Klaus? Because he mentioned he was very proud of his car that consumes 6 liters per 100 kilometers.
I can bet in 2050 we have no more individual cars. It will be impossible.
All right. I think actually it might be time for us to go to our voting, which is rather exciting. We're going to move on to the voting system. So there's a man at the back with a machine that's going to put some questions up on the board, and we are all going to do our voting. So you can get your little device if you've got one of those on your seat. There you go, get one of these. And we're all going to have a go at voting. So some of the questions that we've got here, some will be for the energy part of the event, some for the economics part of the event, and so on. So we'll go through some of the ones on the energy. So when you use this, you basically select the number that corresponds to your choice, and then you press OK, and then when the voting is over, we will get the results up on screen. So let's have the first question, please. According to the Global Energy of the Future report, you've got a copy of that here. By the beginning of the 22nd century, the share of thermonuclear energy will exceed 11% in the fuel and energy balance. When do you think nuclear fusion will generate power on the electricity grid? Is it 50 years, A, B, 70 years, C, 100 years, or D, never? So, cast your votes. When do you think nuclear fusion will generate power on the electricity grid? A, 50 years, B, 70 years, C, 100 years, or D, never? So everybody please vote. Where you say OK, you choose, and then you press OK, and then you should have a little OK in the top corner. And the man at the back will receive all of these votes. Everybody voted? Yes. Okay, can we see the results, please? What does the man from CERN have to say about that? Is that good?
I think 60 years is the right...
That's pretty positive, actually. You got 10% never, though. They talk to him later, okay? All right, 10% never. We'll find out about who those guys are. Right, let's move on to the next question, which is, what is the main reason for the long time of development of nuclear fusion? Why is it taking so long for the development of nuclear fusion? Is it A, the fundamental principle? Is it B, material developments? Is it C, lack of funding? That's what he wants, extra money. Or is it D, lack of competing projects? Lack of competing projects, I don't know. So go ahead and vote. A, is it A, fundamental principle, B, material developments, C, lack of funding, or D, lack of competing projects that is holding back the development of nuclear fusion? I'll give you a couple of seconds to consider this one. Okay, has everybody had a vote? This is fun, isn't it? Everybody voted? Okay, can we see the results, please? Lack of funding, you were right. You started asking for money, and there you go. You've got support here. Fantastic. Well, that's interesting. But 30% on the fundamental principle. How do you react to that?
I think I'm looking at the sun. I think the fundamental principle is working. I think for me, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Because it's working. It's working in the sun, in the stars. After that, how to do in Earth, it's okay. But I don't see any as working fundamental research. I don't see any fundamental principle in fusion.
And material developments, that's clearly a massive challenge,
sure.
Isn't it?
This is a key problem. I think, as I said, is applied research. We have to develop material. We have to research. I think this is fundamental. And I think this will be also some spin-off in different things. But we have to invest about how to test materials. And for instance, this kind of proton, if MIF is the key things. We have to test in the different things how to develop new material, new alloy to resist to very high temperature. This is to the neutron 40 MeV, this is a key thing, yeah, sure.
Okay,
for that we need funding.
Funding.
And a strategy.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, question number 3, which is according to the Global Energy of the Future report, in 15 years, the USA will be the biggest producer of fuel and energy resources in the world, holding the share of 24%. Russia will be in second place at 21%, and China in third at 16%. What prediction will you make for the 50 years period? That's looking forward. Who is going to dominate in the next 50 years? Will A, China dominate, B, Russia dominate, C, nothing will change, the USA will remain dominant? So that's in being the biggest producer of fuel and energy resources in the world. So will A, China dominate, B, Russia dominate, or C, nothing will change? Has everybody voted? Let's have the results, please. Ooh, big vote for the Chinese there, 55%. And nothing will change, also 27%. That's actually... Anybody got anything to say about that from our panel? Go on. Representative from the USA?
I don't think the USA will actually be the one that'll do this. I think the interesting thing, as we talked about it today, is how much will hydrocarbons play a role in the future energy system. If we go 20, 30, 40 years out in the future, and we have all these electric vehicles and transportation system changes, those countries that are investing now in the future of technology for renewables, maybe if fusion comes into the mix, there'll be a very different picture just simply because the major hydrocarbon producers will not be at the forefront. Maybe they'll evolve, and I think that's something to consider.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions to run through. Dominic had something to say. Yeah, go on.
Merci. I just want to give an example here. How much, you know that 10, 15 years ago, the US, they were importing gas. The terminal were out in. Now they are exporting gas. In 10 years, they've been the #1 producer in the world, more than Russia, more than Gazprom today. And they are exporting gas also for geopolitical reasons. Look what they did in Poland and then Lithuania in July. So the question is not who is going to be the first, because the condition can change, and the timing reaction is very important. And if you look at the American internal market, they have, for many reasons that I'm not going to comment, but they have a very short time response, probably because, for instance, they have the property right of the underground belongs to the guy, which is not the case in Russia, which is not the case in Europe, And we have a very, for instance, we have a very, I think, very poor response in our legislative corpus in France for shale gas, for instance, because we are forbidding research. We are doing research, France, in Algeria today on shale gas, which is crazy, basically.
Okay.
Because it's very dangerous, and the responding time is going to be very important, because the market one in the US is going to respond much more quickly to the challenge.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And shale gas is something that didn't really come up, and certainly something to talk about in our coffee break, which is coming up. I realise we're eating into our coffee break time. We've got 3 more questions to run through quickly here. According to the next question, number 4, please. There we go. According to nearly half of the experts surveyed by the Renewable Energy Policy Network for the 21st century, what will be the share of global renewable final energy consumption by 2050? So, in fact, the answer to that is in your report, I think. What will be the share of global renewable final energy consumption by 2050? Is the share of global renewable going to be about same as today, about 20%? That's answer A. Answer B is more than 40%, C, more than 60%, or D, more than 80%. Now, what did all of those experts in that survey say? Has everybody voted? I voted as well now, okay. Can we see the results? Ooh, okay, more than 40%. Well, let's see that happen. Okay, well, that's good. Let's move on to the next question, number 5.
The answer to the question is heavily dependent to the price of the ton of CO2 and the storage issue. If we can solve the storage issue, the figure can change completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, innovation can come quickly if a technology emerges. Let's move to number 5. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, what percentage of all cars on the road globally will be electric by 2040? Will it be 5%, A, or B, 15%, C, 33%, or D, 50%? Of course, lots of the car manufacturers have come out with promises about electrification, as have various other countries and things, but what will really happen? Okay, That's given everybody time to vote, I think. Can we see the results, please? Yeah, I thought that would be the winner. 33% was C. Seems like that was pretty much, I think, what a lot of people were going for, that sort of margin. It's interesting that 15% went for 27% went for 15 now. And let's go on to the last question that we've got in this energy session. What kind of primary energy sources will dominate after 2050? Will it be A, coal, B, oil and natural gas, C, nuclear energy, or D, solar energy? After 2050, which one is going to be king? Not coal anymore, perhaps. I don't know. Coal sounds good, though. Coal is king. It sounds good. It's catchy. But what do you vote for? You know, marketing is not all. Everybody voted? Let's see the results. Oil and natural gas came through just ahead. Won it by a nose. And C, solar energy came in. That's interesting, isn't it? See that result. Was that what you were expecting, experts? Yeah. That's why they're experts. It's exactly what they were expecting. Perfect. Thank you, everybody. It's time to go and have a cup of coffee, and we're supposed to come back in about 10 or 15 minutes. Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to restart. Thanks everybody for coming back, and we're trying to stick vaguely to our timing that we're supposed to be having for this session. Thank you then for everybody who's here. This is now the second session of the Global Energy Prize Summit here at Euronews headquarters. And on stage, we have some new speakers and some of the speakers you saw in the energy session. We're talking about economics. And on stage, the first speaker is going to be William Byun, the Global Energy Prize International Award Committee member, Managing Director at Asia Renewables, Green Power Fuels and Principal at Conchubar Infrastructure Fund. Mr. Byun, the floor is yours. What would you like to tell us about?
In terms of presentation?
Yep.
I'm going to speak about. I'm going to speak about the fund perspective, or maybe the investor's perspective on energy and how it relates to the economy. Just some of the things that I'd like to look into is maybe take a slightly different view and perspective, since the presentation is very short. When we look at energy, I'll say that most of the debate so far has been coming from a supply perspective. We always think about, for example, the issues that I highlight here: populations are growing, energy demand is growing. Always the question seems to be from the supply aspect. How could you make more of it? More is better. It just seems to be more of a matter of something where the demand side maybe is not as conceived. If you look at, for example, energy, is it progress that when we think that it's scaling up of technology per space, scaling up of production? This is the way that maybe energy has conventionally been looked at it, and especially when you think of power from an economics perspective, it's always been classified as sort of in the textbooks as a natural monopoly in the utility side. But then I think if we take a step back and look at something else, I know that when I was younger, when we thought about computing, we had to go to large mainframe computers. You stand in line at a computer center, you bring a stack of punch cards, this is a long time ago, and then you take your turn and you use the computer. It's subsequently changed to having individual PCs, and now if you think about it, most computing is done, especially on an individual level, at using a smartphone. Is this another way to look at possibly the energy perspective going forward, instead of looking at it in the conventional, is demand, is supply something that we always have to think about more? Here I'll take a sideways view. If you think about electric power generation, how about another field that's a little different? And I'm talking about the field of genetic engineering, synthetic biology. Even in the past, again, this is also looking back at conventional wisdom. Ever since maybe high school or university, there's always been a separation of tracks between the physical sciences and the biological sciences. It seems as if it's a different type of field. But if you were to break it down into the component aspects of what the functions are, can we look at the new fields of genetic engineering and synthetic biology as possibly something that may intersect with the field of energy? Looking at the bio-based economy, not necessarily just the economy related to biotech as we think of it now, but in relation to how it's going to affect the future. You can see that independently, it is a growing sector in its own right, but it's one that generally has not intersected with the world of what we conventionally think of as power. And you can see that it's a field where obviously there's disruptions going on in terms of the approach on that supply side. Maybe the final point that I'd like to make is looking at the perspective of energy. If you were to look at synthetic biology, if you were to look at some of the ideas of genetic engineering, a lot of changes are taking place at a very micro level. In other words, changing the energy production specifically a molecule at a time, or even on a cellular basis, or even at a smaller than cellular basis, just on the RNA. Why is that important? It's important now because, especially if you were to look at future change in where the direction of energy is, it's something very different than what we're looking at in terms of a macro scale. But on an individual level, maybe from the investment perspective, you could see that that is an area where there is changes going on an energy perspective, and it may be one that's going to intersect with overall energy and power production in the future. Having said that, obviously, it's the way we're looking at it now, it probably is not going to satisfy our conceptions of efficiency. One of the reasons why bigger is better has always been looked at is because efficiency considerations come into play. If you're to look at the knock on renewables, one of the knock on renewables has always been that it is not as scalable, it is not as efficient in terms of overall quantum of power being delivered. But on the other hand, if you're to look at the way that, for example, what had taken place in computing, it's not necessarily going to replace large-scale energy production. Just like, for example, the fact that we have individual cell phones does not preclude that there are uses specifically for supercomputers. But on an individual level, so much of what we do, maybe we don't have to have the need to rely on mainframe computers, supercomputers. We just rely individually on, for example, smartphones or smaller units of technology. Similarly, especially with the advances taking place now in the genetic engineering of power at the cellular or subcellular level, there could be more of a trend or maybe a future direction that power generation could also come from something outside of the traditional physical sciences, namely from the biological sciences, to be able to provide micro distributive power.
Fascinating. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Fascinating. Some interesting, fresh ideas there. Look forward to talking about those in the Q&A session later on. Thank you, William. So our next speaker is Mr. Raekwon Chung. He's from South Korea, Global Energy Prize International Awards Committee member, Professor Emeritus at the Institute of Convergent Science and Technology at Incheon National University, and advisor to the chair of High-Level Expert and Leaders Panel on Water and Disasters. Mr. Chung, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think our first session has laid a very good foundation of our debate. Our debate is that main topic is 3 E's. I believe the challenge for us is our energy and the economics and ecology are stuck in a negative cycle where the conventional energy sources are undermining ecological sustainability, and in a way also undermining the economic dynamism as well. So I think the topic we have chosen for the summit discussion is very topical. And here, as my background is not energy, but my background is about economics. So in the first session, we have been looking at this issue from the technological perspective. But I would like to look at this challenge from an economics point of view. And from an economics point of view, so far, our civilization, especially the energy side, from coal, we started from coal, industrial revolution, and then oil and electricity, and we are moving, and this process has been happening on their own merits. And we didn't need any intentional push from the public sector because of the availability and the cheap price. So it did not need any kind of push from the public sector. So it happened automatically so far. Now the challenge before us is the issue of sustainability we are facing now cannot be solved automatically because the merit we are feeling from the sustainability is diffused, like a climate change risk. The risk is diffused to so much of the humanity. Why so many of us, as an individuals, we don't feel the benefit of behaving sustainably. So we fail to link my action with the consequences of the risk we are incurring with the burning our fossil fuel. So now the issue is the market price. We are in the first session, we talked a bit about the issues of market, especially Dominic mentioned about carbon pricing and all these issues. Now the point is, many people are saying that renewable energies are more expensive. But is it true? It is expensive simply because we fail to pay ecological and social price of our CO2 emission. That's why the market price is lower.
but this market price is failing ecological and social cost. This is why we are incurring these problems. So I want to show you, this is my main message. Here my point is that if we can we have a level playing field between the fossil fuel and renewable energy? My answer is that if we internalize ecological and social price cost into the market price, we can have a level playing field between the energy sources. Now we all know that globally we are paying 4 times more fossil fuel subsidy than to the renewable energy. So under these circumstances like this, there's no way that renewables can compete with the fossil fuels. We have to reverse this to the other way around. Then the renewables can have a very different picture. So now the people have been talked about carbon tax, and I want to introduce this session, ecological tax reform. Actually, Germany did it in 1999 to 2003. So we cannot only look at this energy issue as a production and the consumption of energy. This is, as already mentioned in the earlier session, that energy means our whole economic system and the social system. It's not just the production and consumption of energy. So now when we are trying to shift away from negative 3E dynamics, we have to turn this around to a positive 3E dynamics, which means that renewable energy sources can stimulate more job growth, economic growth, and also can reduce the ecological sustainability issues. So in moving towards a positive 3E dynamics, then very important policy tools we can employ is that many economists already agreed. We need to put a price on carbon. But this idea seems quite, some people very strange or not used to it, and so countries still finding it difficult to accept. Even the ordinary people find it difficult to accept. But my point is that the proof of many European countries, especially from Europe, like Sweden, and many other countries that have maintained very high price on carbon, in other words, the energy, fossil fuel, these countries did not actually failing their economy. Instead, many of the European countries are maintaining highest level of energy efficiency, and also at the same time, highest level of competitiveness. So it is a very encouraging sign that putting a high price on carbon is not killing the economy. Actually, many of the European countries are showing the proof. So, but somehow, we got a negative perception that carbon price will kill the economy and will kill the jobs. This kind of negative perception is actually restricting our perspectives for the long term. Ecological tax reform is an idea that we reduce tax on income and increasing tax on carbon. So this is an idea, a very interesting idea, has been very much researched in OECD in Paris. And there are many literatures available. And here I'd like to say some success stories. Maybe a country like Costa Rica and Denmark can be picked out as some of the success stories. Then what is the main factor for the success? I see that the long-term consistency of a government policy, as I mentioned earlier, this kind of transformation cannot happen by the market, because market is intrinsically confined by the short-term considerations. So when we are moving towards a long-term dynamics, then it has to be pushed by the government policy. So what I want to say, emphasize as a concluding remark is that from economic point of view, we have to look at this spending on renewable energy as an investment for the future, and we have to take a long-term perspective. We cannot just say that, oh, it does not produce any solutions in 5 years' time, and we just give it up. I think that's not the way we should go. We have to maintain it 20 years, 30 years, then we will have the necessary transformation, I think. Thank you very much.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Cheng. Great, really nice speech. Interesting. Look forward to coming back to that and with some questions later on. Our next speaker, Dominic Fash, who everybody was already familiar with from our first session. Monsieur Fash.
I'm going to try to take some concrete examples. First of all, I like very much the remark about Costa Rica, because I live partly in Costa Rica. have a house over there, and Enel has a few wind farms in Costa Rica, and my electricity in Costa Rica is coming from a wind farm. And basically, they have a very smart policy at the level of the state, which is neutral-free, carbon neutral-free, which is probably the first state that I see which has a kind of a global strategy on this issue. I'll come back to now to reality. I was the head of Enel GK5, which was a huge 8% of the generation in Russia. We had gas, we had the distribution. And unfortunately, I had a station called Riftinskaya, which is in the Ural, which is a coal-fired station, with coal coming from Kazakhstan, from Ekibastos, which is probably one of the most horrible coal that I've ever seen. And we tried to ramp up the whole. It was 3.8 gigawatt, so it's not a small beast. It's a real monster. And I understood that we had a real problem of ecology over there. And we tried to make some investment. Basically, the investment was around $280 million. At this time, it was 5-7 years ago. So we made the investment. But after, I had a problem with the state, with the tariff service, because they didn't want to include the investment in the tariff. So that's a real example of the economy, the real economy. If you try to go, so you have to have a certain level of regulation, a certain level of state regulation and state implication in the overall policy. And that was a famous conversation I had with Vladimir Putin at this time. How can I do if the tariff service cannot include my investment in the overall tariff? So it's a real issue. Relation with the state is very important because, as you know, in our business, regulation is fundamental. And it's difficult to work without regulation, and there is regulation in the United States, and there is a regulation everywhere, all the world. But the problem is those companies, private or state, EDF or American companies, they are run like army. They are centralized. They are completely vertical. And as you know, innovation is horizontal. So it's very contradictory here, the way you manage energy company to the future, to the real innovation. Innovation is coming from small, medium-sized company, and it's very difficult to get them together. And the last thing I want to emphasize is for the future, on the business model again. I think we had a lot of prognosis about the energy mix in 40 years, in 60 years, in 80 years. I think our children are going to face a completely different world. I think we're going to produce energy on the cosmos. We're going to transmit by laser. And it's going to impose a completely different business model, like could be the effect of the internet. So perhaps I'm an utopist, but could happen that as the access to internet is basically free, we can have energy sometime free. But it's completely going against the big vertical monsters, you know, which have a great difficulty to transform themselves. EDF, I'm not going, but EDF is facing challenges like the closure of the station, the cost of the closure, where is the money, who is going to guarantee the closure of the station. When they sign, for instance, in Hinkley Point in England, they sign a contract, what is the cost of each we know that the EPR today is around 10 billions. 10 billion, it means you are going to invest for 30 years. Who can predict you're going to invest for 30 years? And you got a price from the English government, which is 120 pounds, I think. And the actual price of the megawatt is around 30, 35. So you have really economic dead end here in prognosing the future. So I think we have to renew our thinking. It's difficult to have, because there is no worldwide instance of regulation. You have the International Economic Agency, but they are making statistics. They are not making anything on a worldwide regulation. And we have events like what happened for climate, what happened in Florida, in Sabart, and so on. And we should face that. Probably we have to try to manage this at the worldwide level, this question. It's very difficult because it's power intensive. As again, power is power.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fash. Very interesting, very interesting. Our next speaker is Stephen Griffith, who's already been introduced from the UAE and Masdar. And what have you got to say on the topic of economics?
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be back again. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk about the nexus of energy policy and economics. I think as many of you are aware, the economics of any energy technology is very much based on the energy system and the policy in which that technology is deployed. In some cases, the energy system, the policies within that system are very well developed, and they're very supportive of climate and health concerns. In some cases, the policy framework is much less well developed. And so what we need to do is we need to develop a system or a way of thinking which allows us to make energy technologies broadly viable in different geographies and in different energy sectors. When we do that, I think we'll really be able to go toward this important stabilization of making economics for energy technologies broadly successful. So when I talk about energy policy and the nexus of energy policy and economics, I think one of the very important things to do is understand what the definition of energy policy is. I'll be referring back to this a few times throughout the presentation. So energy policy is broadly concerned with the political decisions for implementing programs that help us achieve our energy-related societal goals. These include universal access to affordable energy, energy sources that allow us to spur economic development. Sustainability comes to us very strongly when we look at the key factors around sustainability, which factor into policy, being climate change mitigation, access to energy, energy security, public health, and economic development. So policy, in order to do it well, needs to be implemented via tools that align with national and local rationales for sustainable energy. In the perfect world, we would have the strategy of a region or a country or any context very well aligned with our policy ambitions and focused on trying to achieve all of those different factors I previously mentioned. We would then follow with the political ambitions, the visions for energy, sustainable energy, and then follow that with the strategies and scenarios which are going toward implementation. Importantly, then we decompose that into shorter-term plans, actions, and roadmaps, and then finally, policy and regulation towards making the economics viable is the last step. The policy toolbox is very broad, so I don't think we need to get into the details of that. What's important is we do have fiscal and regulatory tools which allow us to achieve sustainability through an economically viable energy system when our goals and objectives are clearly defined. So today, taking this framework forward, we have 176 countries which have renewable energy, sustainable energy targets. The primary focus of these targets is on the power sector, and I'll come back to this in a bit, but to say that there is a bit of an overlook of heating, cooling, and transportation, it would be important in some of the later discussions. Nonetheless, when we talk about power per se, because that's where the focus is, the tools now progressing to make the economics work from a policy perspective, auctioning and tendering has been at the forefront recently. Although feed-in tariffs had been the tool of choice for quite some time, and I think we're aware of how those compensation schemes work, many of us, the auctioning and tendering has been a price discovery mechanism which has allowed the intrinsic declining economics, the declining cost of renewables really take foothold. So that's been something which has taken up strongly in different parts of the world and will continue, I think, into the future is a key policy choice, because price discovery and allowing us to take advantage of knowledge and opportunities in the local context of where projects are being developed. Costs are coming down and we're taking advantage of that. Because of auctions primarily and the price discovery mechanism, we've seen in recent years renewable energy technologies really able to start to be competitive relative to fossil energy sources, particularly utility scale solar and wind. And what's good about this is the economics are such that now affordability, one of the policy objectives we talked about in this nexus, is clearly met without having any concern for non-cost competitive technology. And we're also getting the side benefits of support for climate, support for health and economic development, which is very good. But this is not the only story. What we continue to now to think about in this nexus as the renewable energy shares grow and the electricity system now in power, we are going to have to change the way the nexus is structured, because historically we'd always been looking at trying to bridge the gap between the cost of fossil energy and renewables. Now with renewables, many of them becoming more cost effective, it's a different story. We need to think about the policy frameworks and the approaches to making large shares of intermittent renewable energy successful in an energy system, so that we can get up to those high levels that are consistent with helping us with our climate concerns and truly mitigating carbon emissions from the power sector. And so we'll look at things previously discussed in today. We'll look at demand side flexibility. We'll have to look at energy storage. We'll look at transmission, interconnection of regions, and then leveraging our fossil-based energy system for firm and flexible capacity to support intermittency. What is very interesting to me is in this study, and I'll refer to others, when you look at the systems perspective now and not the individual project, which we know is cost competitive, you still have the economics of intermittent renewables work. And so this study in Germany, we've done this similar study in the United Arab Emirates, when you understand that the cost of energy technologies are coming down strongly, in the next couple decades, an electricity system, which is based largely on intermittent renewables, when being supported by energy storage at the right level, transmission or connection, can come down in cost to under 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And this is, study after study getting in that region of cost, which is quite interesting. Now, it won't happen unless the policy is supportive of things like competitive tenders, not just for power, but also looking at competitive tenders for demand side flexibility, energy storage, these types of supportive technologies, and also compensating generators that provide firm and flexible capacity, not just on their generation output, because now they're going to be in a system with renewables, but on providing that firm and flexible capacity in itself. So it's a different way of structuring the economics of an energy system, which is very, very important. But that's just the beginning, because we're now talking about climate, we're talking about policy. The power system, even if we completely decarbonized it, of total final energy, power is only about 18 to 20% today. So we have to still think about what is the other side of the equation for trying to get to complete sustainability. Here we have carbon emissions in end-use sectors, industry, transportation, and then buildings to some extent, which are going to have other approaches. We will need to have much higher energy productivity, so we're going to have to lower the amount of demand for energy. Hopefully it'll be decarbonized energy. Electrify increasingly. If we have a decarbonized energy system, we want more electrification to take advantage of that. And thirdly, and this is kind of an important and interesting point on some of the other topics discussed, the need to capture and or utilize the carbon dioxide emissions which remain in the energy system no matter what we do. And so the question then is, how do we go about making this economical? How do the economics work? And over again, the topic come up is carbon price. So the carbon pricing, we can do this implicitly by putting standards and regulations which force companies and emitters to have lower emissions. We can have broad carbon coverage, you see sort of lower right, through having quotas and obligations for renewables, for instance, so forcing the system to be based on cleaner energy. Or, as many would say, we're going to have to move toward a price on carbon to fully get the stimulation for a sustainable system. And so the Energy Transitions Commission has written some recent reports saying in the 2020s we might have to have a $50 per ton price of carbon by 2030s. This could get up to $100 per ton. Now, I'm personally optimistic that we can do a lot with just innovation and technology, so light-duty vehicles, electrified, maybe replacing entire industries which are energy intensive through 3D printing and materials which are replacing, say, steels and cements, for instance. But ultimately, the question that comes up, I think, is going to stay with us for quite some time: is do we need to have an internationally agreed price of carbon in order to take care of the system the way that we would like to see it happen? So with that, I'll finish, and we'll be happy to discuss this further in the discussion session.
Marvellous. Thank you, Mr. Stephen Griffiths. Last speaker in this session before we go to questions is Klaus Riedler.
The gross national product of any country is a measure for its economic strengths, but also for the standard of living of its people. Therefore, we have, even under sustainability arguments, accept that developing countries want to increase their GNP and therefore their increase in energy use. However, this is an extremely expensive effort, and my first slide shows in the left column that in the next 20 years we will be spending $40 trillion for energy, about 60% for fossil fuel extraction, refining, transportation, and 40% for power. And if you look into the annulus, it tells you for fossil, it's about 2/3 oil, 1/3 gas, coal, very little. And for fossil, the extraction is the main thing, very little transportation and refining. The blue part of the annulus is power, and there you see transport, transmission and distribution is about 40%. 60% is new electricity generation, and in line with what we have discussed here, the investments into renewable power is about twice as much as for coal, gas, and nuclear. However, this burden is a burden for every economy, and it has an interesting influence that any country can determine how it burdens its energy price. And it is important because the various industries and their product or production costs are heavily influenced by the energy price. Not only petrochemical and fertilizers, but some base materials like aluminum, steel, cement are burdened by the energy price. And so every country has to be aware, do I still want that industry in my country, or do I import from wherever it comes? So it is a very important issue for the kind of how you see the future job situation in your country. Now, in terms of renewables, the investment, as we have seen, is very large. And the problem there, one of the big problems is the intermittency of its supply. And we have to accept that all countries would want to have a secure supply and expect help in doing that. The international development banks are helping to a large extent that those countries who are willing can put up such systems. However, any lender expects a return and expects a political security for its investment. So this is a warning for some of the developing countries. But even in industrialized countries, the energy system is not without its risks, in part due to the overconfidence of those countries in their economic strengths, and also in the speed future technology will be available. We should be aware that many investments into the energy system are built for a 20 to 40-year life to make their return. So if a government changes suddenly its policy, you end up in large stranded assets and also a downturn of the share price of those utilities, as we have seen. Now, this is not the biggest risk. The biggest risk is that those investors will draw back from certain areas of energy, not only in investment, but especially in R&D. Will any Western company still invest in coal? No. But still, We have seen how large a share coal will do in the future for power generation, and nobody is around to improve the existing systems. Energy system, as I said before, is a very complex one, and I take to prove that a graph of my former employer Siemens, which plots over the degree or the degree of certainty over the degree of importance. And there is technology decisions. Should they invest into renewables? Should they invest into hydrogen? Should they invest in nuclear? But then come in the government decisions. What kind of framework will they set for climate change? What kind of energy price will they set? And even the market design is difficult. Will they have a capacity market? Will they set up subsidies? So seeing that complex picture, not only industry has a hard time, but any scenario predicting what will be the future will have a very difficult job. Now, let me answer that as I tell my students. We all have the possibility as an individual to say, I want that. And the German philosopher Weber has already 100 years ago said, yes, there is an ethics of the conscience. Everybody is free to make his decision how he wants his energy, how much he wants to use. But then he says there is a conflict with the ethics of responsibility. What will happen if everybody were to live as I would like to do? Can the society afford that? Will they accept it? And he gives an advice saying, and the governments, seeing both sides, should then wisely decide to the best of their people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus Riedler, for that presentation. It's time to go to questions. We've got about 10 minutes or so for questions, and there's a lot of topics, a lot of very different points of view as well coming out here on the economics debate. So any questions from the audience? No hands going up for the moment. I'm going to get started with some of my questions from my side. Demand side flexibility, somebody was talking about. Do you actually believe that that's credible and possible to get that to happen? Or people are always going to want to have exactly what they have at the moment?
Take that one. Well, I think demand side flexibility is extremely important because there's two ports to it. You can curtail demand or you can try and shift loads. Part of the decision on how we do this is going to be technological. We're going to have to be able to connect people to systems that allow us to shift the loads and understand what their demand is and match that with supply. The other one is what incentive you have to do that. So this is when I was talking about auctions. Can we say that we're going to give a price for someone, a company, a corporation, or individual to allow them to be part of an economic return for allowing us to shift their load or curtail their load based on what we have from the power system, whether in the form of renewable energy or intermittency or what have you. The other part to that when we talk about the demand side is I think you want to be able to have people understand through price signals themselves that they need to be able to curtail their demands. So today, if it's a flat price, we're not giving people the economic incentive through pricing when there's peak demand or when there's a lack of availability of surplus energy. If they're not economically incentivized to reduce what they're doing with their washing machines or whatever it may be that's consuming energy, they won't do that. So I think it's there's a large systems view to it as we can take those industrial consumers, we can take those commercial consumers, incentivize them in certain ways, auctioning perhaps, and then using... Who
would actually do that though? Is that the electricity supplier or the power supplier in that case, or is it a government policy that makes that happen?
I think partly I think the answer will be how the utilities will have to evolve into the future, is they'll have to be part of this system. The electric utility today, as we start to see the need to have more system control to make their economics viable as we get greater amount of renewable energy and distributed generation, I think they would be part of that system in support with government, of course, because this policy framework we talk about has got to be something It's going to be continually evolved with industry and then also with the government stakeholder who's trying to do the systems planning. Because a transition system typically is run by the government, but it's got to be coordinated with the private sector. It's got to be coordinated by those that are directly involved in now trying to evolve toward a supply and demand balancing, which is more challenging.
Anybody else got anything to say on that? Dominique?
The price of the virtual kilowatt not to be consumed. That's a new story today. And you know, for a generator, the 5% of the peak is the golden one. It's the most expensive investment that you have to do. So this virtual kilowatts you are going to save, you can even pay for it, which begins to happen today. There will be trading on those virtual kilowatt not to be produced, which are going to be purchased by a generator to save this final 5% peak, which is golden.
I'd like to add the point that the dilemma we are having here in our conversation, we are going around and around. And then in order to get out of this box, we have to think out of the box. For example, in the previous session, Frederick mentioned a very interesting question. Do we need a car? Because we are thinking that we are going to maintain the current structure of our society and economy as it is now. And then trying to ask ourselves, oh, renewable energy can answer this question. But when we think of from out of the box, we can design and change our city design, urban planning. Actually, this has briefly happened when there was a first oil crisis in the 70s and even 90s. When the oil price went up to $4 in the United States, what happened at that time was that driving from suburban areas to the downtown in the United States rapidly collapses. And the people try to move inside the city to live closer to their working spaces. So this kind of experiment shows that we can have a very different perspective from the policy dimension, and pricing dimension can stimulate a very different approach. So I think what I want to emphasize is that Klaus also mentioned that we want to increase the GDP. That's true. Still, we are using the GDP as a measure of our development. That's the dilemma we have, actually. We need to invent. Actually, OECD has been discussing about it, how to improve our GDP measure, because it's not correct. So we have to internalize sustainability into our GDP, but still we don't get there yet. So the issue is that we have to get out of this current system box and to think from outside. The main key issue is looking at it from a long-term perspective. The success factor is a long-term consistency. When the carbon tax issue is related, when we discussed with the business circle, when we are negotiating towards a Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, what business was saying is that, like BP and all those oil exporting business countries, companies, they didn't oppose carbon tax. What they want is give us a very clear idea of predictability. For example, if a carbon tax will increase $1 per ton every year until 2050, then business say, that's fine then. We will adjust our investment schedule according to that pricing. So what business don't like is uncertainty. Uncertainty is the risk. So as long as the government comes with the long-term consistency and the predictability, then I think we can get there. But the reason why then governments are not doing is because they are all afraid carbon tax will kill the jobs and economic growth. This kind of a negative messaging is actually distorting our perception. Is it true? Actually, I don't believe that. We can stimulate our economic growth and jobs by introducing our carbon tax. As I said earlier, many examples in Europe, especially in Europe, where the countries maintain the very high price on energy compared to the United States, you are maintaining high level of energy efficiency and also high level of competitiveness. So this shows, this is a proof, better than the modeling of economists. So I think we have to think out of the box other than inside of the box.
Maybe we need a new name for tax. We need to call it something else, because every time a politician says, I want to bring in a tax, it's not really a vote winner. William, I could see you were desperate to say something.
I would say that, again, we're looking, when we talk about demand management, maybe it's more on the supply side that's going to be where the change will take place. When you mentioned about large companies and how they're going to be deal with a transformative future, again, using my analogy about computing supply generation, if you were to think about the companies like Sperry or Burroughs or even IBM, those were the giants of supply generation at their time, but really, where are they now? And it's not like those companies disappeared because of policy differences. There was never any policy against them. It's that demand has shifted. And especially the things that you had highlighted in terms of policy instability for long investment frameworks. From an investment perspective, if you look at the current environment now where returns are so low across so many sectors, and where more and more funds are looking aggressively for investments in, for example, managed private equity type of funds, there really is a time pressure. And time pressure means that those kinds of large-scale supply type or policy related to supply on a longer framework is going to be increasingly more difficult. And the market naturally should evolve more toward a look toward higher yields from very short and micro steps.
Fascinating. And are there any other questions here? In which case, there we go. Otherwise, we'll go to the voting. Tell us your name and tell us your job and give us your question.
Hi, my name is Sarah Hatton. I recently graduated studying chemical engineering. And I wanted to just add, in context to sustainability and sustainable development, I think it's important to see energy as part of a pragmatic view, so that putting it into context with solving other issues in the economy, such as excess supply of food and waste management treatment. If we want to look at a new system and a more efficient system overall for the overall economy, we should look at all these problems together and maybe try and aim at designing a system which something like anaerobic digestion plants, for example, where you can use these excess amounts of food to create energy, where you're solving not only problems in the food industry, also the energy industry, the waste, stuff like that. I mean, if anyone could add something to just a pragmatic view and putting energy in that context, that would be great.
Actually, that's what I was going to talk about in the third session, so I'll leave it for that.
There we go. All right, so let's go through let's do some voting, and then we can hear about all of that from William. So let's go through to the questions that we have on economics. And the first one is, according to the International Renewable Energy Agency, doubling the share of renewables in the global energy mix by 2030 would increase global GDP by up to, how much did they say? Was it A, $1.3 million compared to business as usual? $1.3 trillion compared to business as usual? $13 million compared to business as usual, or it won't increase global GDP? So that's a question. According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, doubling the share of renewables in the global energy mix by 2030 would increase global GDP by up to how much? Now, did you read that report? Do you know the number, or are you just guessing? In my case, possibly just guessing, but I'm sure if you have a smartphone, you can look it up. So if everybody would like to vote, let's see if this works. Okay, can we see the results? B did well, 94%. Wow, we're all in agreement on that one then. Let's go to question number 2. The Paris Treaty requests all countries to spend large amounts to decarbonize their energy system. How would you prioritize the following spending? Which topic should have preference in your opinion? So should we be spending money on dealing with climate change, public health, employment, or education? So the Paris Treaty requests all countries to spend large amounts to decarbonize their energy system. What should they be spending their time and their money on dealing with? Interesting to see what results we get from this one. Has everybody voted? Okay, let's see the results, please. Quite split. Lots of votes for climate change, but a lot of support for education as well. Okay, let's go on to another one here. And now this one is for those who've got a smartphone with them or who are kind of geeks on carbon tax. What is the level of carbon tax in Sweden? I know because I looked it up. Well, I'm not going to tell you. Okay. I'm not sure whether you get any prizes for getting it right. But would everybody like to give their choice? Was it $5 US per ton of CO2, 54, 110, or 131? Okay, can we see the results, please? Ooh. I believe the actual answer is D. Is that? Yeah. It's true. It's 131, isn't it? Yeah. There we go. Hands up who voted D. You can prove that you're right. You were right. I voted D because I looked it up. He did too. It's the last one in the economics section. Go on.
Interject with a comment?
Yes.
If you discuss this in Germany, which has a double regulation, the EEG supporting renewables, which is battling or competing with CO2 tax. So I would assume the CO2 tax per ton is about 8 euros per ton, because the major front in financing is the support for the renewables. Oh.
Thank you, Claes. I think we could all hear you. Last question on this economic section, which is number 4. What major international energy company has stated that it wants to have a fifth of its assets invested in low-carbon business by 2035? Is it A, BP, B, Exxon, C, Total, or D, Shell? A clue is that the company in question has been mentioned this morning, but that doesn't narrow it down especially. All right, has everybody voted? I haven't voted yet. Here we go. All right, let's see if we all know the answer to that one. Yep, we got a lot of people who thought the answer was C, Total, which is the correct answer, I believe. And but Shell, obviously, you've got a lot of supporters here. 33%, they did pretty well. Okay, marvelous. Thanks very much for the economic section speakers there. Some of you are staying on stage. Some of you, it's time to go and join the audience. And Marta Bonifet is going to come up on stage. So this is the third session at this summit event here at Euronews in Lyon, and we've talked about economics, and we've talked about energy, and now it's time to talk about ecology to complete our 3 E's. And welcome up on stage Marta Bonifet, who's Global Energy Prize International Award Committee member and advisor to AgroInnova University of Turin Scientific Committee. Marta, over to you. The floor is yours.
I'm trying to collect the devices. Yes, one more. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm wearing a lot of hats. So besides AgroInnova, I'm also working a lot with the business sector, the Business Leaders Forum, I'm advisory there, or EBRD. So I think what is quite important is to bring you a picture. I don't know whether you have seen this picture before or not. This is almost 50 years old picture. It was taken by Apollo 8, astronaut Bill Anders, and this is the rise of the Earth from the moon's perspective. So I would like to say what you see here is a planet, a fragile planet. So besides energy, besides economy, besides ecology, we have the fourth one, the Earth, the planet Earth. And I think Euronews also, of course, the number 5. But I think it's quite important to remember that we have one planet. we started to talk about sustainability roughly 30 years ago with the Gro Harlem Brundtland's then Prime Minister of Norway's Special Commission, Our Common Future, came up with a report that we have to rethink our lifestyle. We have to think about differently on this planet, and we have to be in harmony. As Dennis Meadows was putting it very rightly, beyond the limits, we have to remember that our present way of consumption, and Klaus was very rightly saying that if we continue the way how we're consuming our resources, it is not sustainable. So we have to think about that if we continue as we continue, we might need, and according to Dennis, since 2011, we would need more than one planet. By 2050, we would need at least 2 planets. And by 2100, 4 planets. Have you seen any other planet around us from the moon perspective? No. So obviously, we have to start to think about it. And this morning, I also heard that the temperature anomalies are more or less in line. But if you really think about it, the 21st century, 17 years, are the hottest on the planet Earth, except for 1 year. And if you look at it, you can also see from Dennis Meadows that the number of disasters, whether we talk about floods, whether we talk about hurricanes, whether we talk about forest fires, are increasing. So it's quite evident that there is something happening around us, and these issues are coming up in a lot of very important reports that are highlighting year on year the events that are happening from the Arctic down to every continent. And if you open the news as of this few months, you can see what happened in Europe, in Portugal. You can see what happened in the Mediterranean. You can see what happens in the Caribbean or in the States. So I have to say that these events are indeed increasing, and we, as citizens of this planet, we are exposed to it. There is one more element that I would like to highlight from the megatrends. When I was born, and I'm not going to say which year, but there were 2.5 billion people living at that time, so you can look at the graph. By now, it's around 7.5 billion people. And as the trends are going, we will be 10 billion people by the end of 2050. So please put it into the back of your mind. And also when we talk about, and this is a very good slide that I received from the European Environmental Agency, Mr. Brunix was talking about that we are still measuring our success rate with GDPs. And if we do business as usual, we will be increasing by 2050 300%. So if we are not coming up with another type of model of measuring progression, this is going to be driving force forward. The second thing is that more and more people live in cities. So we have mega cities booming around the world. And if you really think about that in Europe, more than 70% of the population lives in cities, presently in the world more than 50%, but according to 2050, it's going to be 67% of the world population. Think about the energy issues. Think about all the utilities. Think about everything that is going to be needed to run these cities in an efficient way. And last but not least, if we would all like to have the same things around the world, then think about 1.8 billion middle-class people living in the earth in 2010. And this is going to be 4.9 billion by 2030. So, and everybody would like to have a car. Everybody would like to have the same type of gadgets. I don't know how many smartphones you have around you, how many different gadgets you are collecting, but I think that we have to keep in mind that this 170% increase has a tremendous impact of resource use and pollution. So do we have a way forward? And I say that what many of you said in the energy and in the economy perspective, yes, we do have. Starting from global agreements, whether they are soft or whether they are strong, but the global agreement that led to the Sustainable Development Goals, I think it's a very promising way forward. Because in this way, we can see a long-term perspective of working together, taking people into consideration, the planet, the prosperity and peace. Because without this, we will not be able to work and live on this planet, the blue planet. So what are the important about the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals? That they are universal. It works for me, it works for you, it works for different continents, disciplines. It's integration, because we cannot look into things in silos, we cannot continue, and it's transformational. And I would like to say here, and I'm looking at Igor, that the Global Energy Prize for the past 15 years, really, you were taking into consideration the universality, the integration and transformation from the energy perspective, but driving the processes for the planet. And this is why I enjoyed being part of this community of the international award team and committee. When you look into sustainable energy use, and many of you have pointed out that there is clashing ideas, there is a lot of clashing perspectives. When we talk about economic growth, when we talk about productivity, when we talk about resilience, because we have to build our cities in a way that are going to be resilient to the extreme heat, to the flash floods that are hopefully not coming, but they are there, and sustainable consumption production. And here comes the question to the lady that yes, these cities has to be able to utilize the best way the resources that are available, and we need urgent actions to combat climate change. Last but not least, education, so universities around the world, media like yourselves are going to be, because we need interfaces. What you heard today about science, about energy, about economy, how do you translate it to people like myself sitting in front of the television? So your roles are going to be extremely important. Last but not least, there are a lot of prognoses that are coming up, a lot of pledges to be made. But there is one that is very important that we never mentioned today. We made a pledge that we will be ensuring universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services to all on the planet. Do you know what it means when there are around 1 billion people without it, and there is an increase of population? So it's in the hands of science, of policymakers, economists, to make this dream or vision a reality. And last but not least, there are a lot of futures. And a lot of futures were prognosed before. But as we said, did you ever thought about it, that the digital world is going to be changing our lives so tremendously? I think that there are a lot of uncertainties, but there is quite a few points here that I would like to mention, that there will be need, and there will be a clashes to supply those needs of energy, of water, of food. These nexuses will come up, and there will be providers, and hopefully there will be a lot of champions of these provisions. Last but not least, we need leadership. Leadership at UN level, and this is why it was important at the beginning of this year, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was emphasizing not only the threats related to climate change and the megatrends, but the opportunities, the business opportunities. And this is what I would like to say, that please think about the future as an opportunity and use mechanisms like the Global Energy Prize and also Euronews to spread the news forward. Last but not least, we talked a lot about the United States and about stepping back and forth and side of the Paris commitments. But there are 12 states representing 1/3 of the United States people that are committed to continue. And we are still in, this is part of the climate reality presentation, 125 cities, states, universities, businesses that are driving the difference. So what I'm saying is that we as individuals, we as communities, businesses can really go forward and make the difference. And last but not least, the value is quite important also for the religious leaders. 1st of September this year, 2 of them, the Pope and the Patriarch, was making a commitment and highlighting why climate change needs unified action to bring prosperity, peace, and ecology opportunities for the future. I would like to end again with the European environmental agencies. 2 slides. One of them, we have to live in our limits, and we have limits. And this is how I started. You have seen that we have only one Earth. So that's our limitation. Ecosystem, we have to think about the systems, but they are interactive. And here I would like to say very much, Igor, that when you translate the energy issues to the youth, to the children, and you bring them back on board with the scientists, this is really showing to the children how to live in the limits and for the future. Last but not least, global system of production, consumption need to be reconfigured. This is the second, is showing our global footprint. It shows that where are we compared to our Human Development Index, what are our environmental limits, what is a good life, and what you don't see, 2 more arrows, that from the upper part, the little red dots are the European Union countries, we need to get into that little yellow box, which is the sustainability factor. And I think we have a lot of homework to do. And I would like to thank once again the opportunity to be able to be here with you and to say that these are all activities and opportunities for the future, for cooperation. And without this kind of summits, things will not be changing that fast. But here, when we are sharing, and we are really involving as many people as possible, we could be hopefully the interfaces for the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta, for that very, very passionate speech. Great. Our next speaker is William Björn. Thank you, William.
One of the things that struck me when I first heard about this session is that it's the third E is ecology, as opposed to environment. And maybe in thinking about that difference, one thing that came to my mind is to look at a slightly different perspective. In other words, what is our maybe individual relationship with energy? I know that sounds a little strange to think about, but first off, it's clear that a lot of the energy demand is going to be taking place in developing countries. That's where a lot of my work is. And frankly, the issues that come in terms of the fairness of having access to more energy use as opposed to environmental concerns, that's always been considered maybe a conflict that has to be addressed, whether by regulation or policy or some other kinds of means. Again, is this energy ecology something that we need to think about from an international or national policy perspective? Are we always looking at technology as something kind of like a magic wand that'll take care of things? And when we think about investments, where's the investments going to go in exactly? If you make a macro framework, that's really nice, but from an individual investment perspective, what does that really entail? How can energy be considered as a part of the ecology? That's at least one of the questions that came to my mind when I first thought about this. If you look at the drivers in emerging market countries, especially in Asia, there's many different things that are driving here. And if you notice, none of them are related to the environment. this is sort of the reality that I see in Asia. Maybe a lot of it is the need for more energy, some of it is energy security, and also maybe environmentally translates into social stability issues. If you've been to some of the cities out there, it's not always a very pleasant environment. That comes down to, again, the split between who has priority in terms of use of energy. Is it something that can be regulated onward? Okay, this is not a political slide. What I meant by this is more the perspective of, are we looking at energy from a top-down perspective? In other words, there's a change in policy, the ecology looks bad going forward for energy. There's a change in policy in another direction, it's going to be good. Is this really the right form in which direction is going to take place? And obviously by saying that, I'm thinking that maybe there's another way of looking at it. Earlier I talked about the computing sector. I'll bring another parallel. If we look at the food sector, food is another one where you would think that traditionally the idea has been you should produce more food, there's a need for more caloric output to satisfy starvation or hunger issues for everyone. More is better, et cetera, et cetera. But is that the relationship that each of us has with food? I mean, do we wake up thinking that, how am I going to satisfy my caloric needs? Maybe most of us think, or at least I think about how am I going to limit my caloric needs. And it, again, comes down to the question of size and identity. Looking back at the mainframe computers, I didn't find it very pleasant to have to go to a computing center, wait on the terms of whoever operates the site to be able to use the computer. And now it's much more empowering to have the individuality of computing power in your own hands. And you see people who are using and comfortable with computing power that you would never think has any even scientific understanding of where that power comes from. Is that the direction that we may be able to look at the change of energy ecology? Same thing with food. Instead of just producing more of it, maybe the relation we have with food is something that's more on the social level or on a level of individual expression. At least that's the way that I see with my children when they think of food as maybe something fun, something as a way of individual expression. And maybe that's a clue as to another way to look at energy from an ecological perspective. When you think about the arguments made against or some of the complaints about organic foods or non-GMO foods, there a lot of times the argument is price issues, that it's too expensive, that you can't have as much volume as you could just by having GMO foods or something that is not as individually tailored. But at the same time, that's in terms of the economic size and in terms of the direction that you could see on the individual basis. That's where the food industry is going. That's where the food investments are. And you could see private sector investment in food is on the rise. Not necessarily because they think, oh, I'm going to invest in a company that'll just produce more food, but it's because there's more of an ability to capture that kind of individual and ground up dynamism into the food sector. Is that where energy is going to be from? In other words, there's more of an individual touch toward being able to control our energy. It's not going to be someone pouring cooking oil into their car necessarily, or we're driving around on a bicycle with coals. These are actual pictures that take place. But again, from the kind of the penumbra of energy that I talked about before, something that maybe comes from the, I like the idea of the genetic engineering section, or other kinds of things that maybe relate to the biological aspect of science. And in that respect, I would say the final comment would be on the other end of the food cycle, i.e., for example, waste management. I see a lot of waste management in my work in renewable energy. If you go to any of the major cities in Asia, the amount of waste generated is about 5 to 10,000 tons of garbage per day. So if you picture that, you could imagine it's like 50,000 tons and half, maybe about 1.5 million tons. These are quite large numbers, and there's really no management of it going on. And we treat it as a separate issue from energy. The more that maybe there's a holistic look at, for example, the biological aspects of energy, could those sources be utilized to control not only the waste issues, but toward a way to maybe drive innovation and investments, not investments on a large, grand, long-term thing, but into specific individualized means of having access to energy. Maybe that's a way that we could look at it from a holistic ecological perspective.
Thank you. Very thought-provoking. Excellent. Our last speaker in this ecology session before we go to Q&A and the voting is Ray Kwon Chung.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to build on what Martha and William has mentioned. Actually, since this is an ecology session, I would like to briefly point out some of the conclusions of IPCC Assessment Report 5. And this is not what I'm saying. It is in the report. It's going to be about 4 degrees hotter than now by 2100. And the sea level will be rising. And then also the other important point is that many people are criticizing about the Paris Climate Agreement and saying that, oh, this is not enough. Some is arguing like that. It is true. It is true that even with the Paris Climate Agreement, it can only slow down to a certain degree, which is well below the global target, which is 2 degrees Celsius. We agreed on this target, but it is clear we cannot meet this target only by the Paris Climate Agreement. But here I'd like to emphasize the real impact of the Paris Climate Agreement will not come from the pledges they made today, but from the fact that they agreed to adopt low greenhouse gas emission development strategy by 2020. This is a global consensus in 2015. I think this is more important than the pledge itself, which is this is going to sending out a very clear signal to the market and the businesses that there will be a paradigm shift from the government side. So, but the only issue is how can we scale up, scope and scale of this low carbon greenhouse gas development strategy that's going to be defined by the policies of the public sector. So now here, what is very important by here is that whether shifting towards a new 3E paradigm, in other words, where renewable energy can stimulate economic growth, job creation, whether it is going to be really true or not. But in promoting this idea, I have been facing some very negative messagings from conventional economists. What I mentioned here is that there's one scientist argue that Paris Climate Agreement will cost global economy $1 to $3 trillion every year until 2030. And EU GDP will be reduced by 1.6% by 2030. This is quite contrary to what our renewable energy organization has mentioned in the previous session. So this kind of messaging from the conventional economist, I find that this kind of conventional messaging from the conventional economist is very damaging and very detrimental. I think that the mindset of the many policymakers, business and ordinary people, even the United States case, is a typical example that their perception is biased by this conventional CGE modeling. These conventional economists, they are coming up with the projections saying that, oh, there will be a reduction of GDP if we are spending our money on renewable energy. They are using CGE model, which is a static and it's a very short-term equilibrium model. By definition, this CGE model cannot make any kind of a credible long-term dynamic equilibrium projections for the future. But nevertheless, these people are coming up and arguing that, oh, spending on renewable energy will kill the global economy. That kind of messaging actually is defining our mindset about the relationship between the economy and our ecology. So I was once upon a time mentioned about the need for climate economics rather than conventional economics. Climate economics means investing in renewable energy for a long time, with a long-term consistency, will in the long run will stimulate economic growth. I have some more models I can show, but I didn't put in here because of the time constraint. But I think the perception that environment or ecology is a burden on our economy has a long history. We have a fixed mindset that, oh, spending money on ecology is a burden and cost. This mindset has been with us for a long, long time. And it's very difficult to change this. So, but I will highlight one very interesting example to me after the financial crisis in 2008. Very briefly, world government leaders, G20 leaders agreed to come up with a Green New Deal. Green New Deal. You might remember that. Green New Deal means, in order to stimulate and revive global economy, let's spend money on environment. That was the idea, very interesting idea. We have never thought about environment as a driver of economic growth. It was the other way around. But only after this financial crisis, I call it thanks to financial crisis. Very briefly, these world leaders changed their mind that, oh, let's use environment as a driver of our economic growth. But unfortunately, this idea was very briefly, then it was then faded away as the financial crisis subsided. So personally, I have been promoting the idea of green growth as a paradigm that investing in sustainability can drive our economic growth. As Marta has mentioned, our Sustainable Development Goal is a very important document for our future. But what is lacking in that document is, even though it is a list of our goals, but it does not include how. It does not say how. It just leave all the countries to do it on their own way. So this is actually an open question. But I have been promoting from ESCAP as a director, I was promoting the idea of a green growth. Because I was convinced that unless we change the dynamics between environment and economics to a win-win synergy, I thought that we could not solve this problem and dilemma. So I was arguing that green can be a driver of economic growth. So I've been pushing this idea since 2005. And I have published books and report how we can do that. It's a low-carbon green growth roadmap. It's already published. But I was pushing this for some time, about a decade. But now, after the financial crisis subsided, then the idea of a Green New Deal is also now be almost forgotten. So it's a little bit sad about it. But I think it's too early to give up. Paris Climate Agreement revived it again. The world leaders have agreed on this. So I hope that there is some hope for our paradigm shift on that. And regarding the issue of impact of US withdrawal, as Marta also mentioned about it, I think ultimately the impact will depend on the collective action of the rest of us, rather than it depends on actions of the United States. So I think it depends on how far we can go together hand in hand in pushing forward our sustainability agenda. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for some passionate speeches on this panel here on ecology. Very interesting. Opening up to questions now, if anybody has any questions from the floor. If any of the other experts as well have got any comments as well on what has been said, I'd be very interested to hear them. I'm interested to hear about what you think about William was saying about energy becoming a kind of an identity choice for individuals. Do you kind of agree with that? Do you think that's something that could happen?
Actually, if you really think about it, it's already happening. Because when you go and buy your refrigerator, you look at the energy labeling and also the resources. So when you buy your gadgets, you buy it in a way. And I'm very happy to see that that some of them are having remarks where they are sourced from, what they are sourced from. So in the hotel where we are staying, I was very pleasantly surprised in Novotel that everywhere there is a sign saying that where the soap is coming from, it's fair trade product, and this is the source of origin. So if you ask me, then yes, already it's in our system. We can make the choices as consumers, and I think it will depend a lot on us. First of all, as consumers buying the products. Second, whom we are going to be voting for. The governments, because there are policies that are being really shown to us, and which policies are more in line with the thoughts and values that we are seeing that are going to be quite important. What I liked today morning very much is the long-term views, because we elect politicians short-term. And all the decisions we are making about having a new infrastructure developed for energy use is 20, 30 years of investment. So please think about it, that we have to think long-term to be able to succeed and to do the changes and the paradigm shifts, yet our choices are very short-term. So this is going to be, for me, a very important message that we need to be addressing, is how to overcome this by our own choices, our activities, and our vision for the future. Thank you.
I thought what Mr. Chung was saying earlier was quite interesting, talking about politicians having a short-term view. You can't really blame them, can you? They're elected every 5 years. That's their job to get elected. It's not their job to save the planet. So how do you persuade them, actually? How do you talk to them face to face?
That's a very good question. Actually, I didn't touch on that, but I'm very eager to touch on that issue, because we are sometimes often blaming the politicians for not taking strong actions for climate change. But I think we are failing ourselves in blaming the politicians, because politicians will do anything if they are going to get votes from the people. But they are doing this because they feel that if they take such a decision, they feel that they might lose the vote. That's why they are not taking that kind of actions, right? So there's no way we can actually blame the politicians. But there are very interesting examples. I'm sometimes highlighting the case of Mr. Mayor, the former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone. I actually admire him because he was a very brave hero. When he was a mayor, it was quite some time ago, that when he introduced a congestion charge in London as a mayor, there was a strong opposition in London. Then he said, in spite of the fact that the re-election is only 1 year away, but he introduced it and introduced £5 congestion charge. And then he said, I don't care. Even though I lose my job, I will introduce it. That's my mission. Then what happened is a very interesting, funny story, because I'm telling this to many politicians as well. But he introduced it in 2013, I believe, February. And by the end of the 2013, the results of the £5 congestion charge were proven to be very positive. Air pollution is improved in London, and also air traffic circulation very much improved. And the people feel that, oh, there's not much difficulty of having that system in. And so now his popularity went up, and he was re-elected. This is a very interesting case, but we cannot expect this case to be repeated everywhere. But then the more important point is that how can you prove such kind of political action or decision for paradigm shift can be more scaled up and spread out? I think it depends on the conviction that whether such an action, climate action, can actually generate more jobs, more economic growth. So that's why I have been emphasizing and looking for policy tools. What can be used to link climate action or sustainability action with the jobs and economic growth? Unless we fail to link this, it will be very difficult to persuade the people and the politicians to take any action. Yes, it's one way of doing that. As William has mentioned, we can rely on bottom-up, from the change of mindset, behaviors from the people, ordinary people. But at the same time, we also need a top-down as well. It has to go hand in hand together. And one of the top-down approach I've just briefly mentioned in my earlier session was ecological tax reform. When I was looking for policy tools, when I was promoting the green growth idea, I found this tool, ecological tax reform. Actually, it is tested in Germany, in Europe. I hope. This is, as I said earlier, reducing income tax, increasing carbon tax. So it is a very interesting way of shifting our mindset. Then this will generate more job creation even stimulate more economic growth and reducing CO2 emission. Germany did it from 1999 to 2003, and they came up with the positive results. So I'm still very much hopeful, looking forward to some more European countries to introduce this ecological tax reform, because this is a very interesting tool. Without damaging the economy, it can achieve the double dividend. On the one hand, it can generate jobs at the same time, and it can reduce the climate risk issues. Then why don't we do that, right? This is a very simple question. The basic reason is there's still a lot of suspicion and the misbelief about this. There's no confidence about it. So now our job is, how can we improve the confidence on this issue? I find some more modelings from Cambridge University. They came up with a very interesting modeling, which is different from conventional economics modeling. This 3ME model is coming up. Contrary to the conventional model, it says, as was like a renewable energy organization mentioned, the global GDP will grow if we introduce more than 100 US dollar per ton of carbon tax. So global GDP will grow rather than reduce. So I think what we need is that we need to disseminate a lot more of this kind of positive messaging to the public. I think this is what we need. And I think Euronews can play on the global energy price, can play a very important role in spreading out this positive messaging. We are suffering from negative messaging, such as the message I mentioned, because I saw this report saying that, oh, it will reduce EU's GDP by 1.6%, and then it hit the headline of the Times, all those major CNN, all these major world media was reporting it as a headline. But when some other researchers came up with the positive messaging, I never saw that kind of positive messaging was hitting the headlines of world media. So we are suffering in the battling with the negative messaging and the positive messaging.
You talked about the oil crisis. Do you think you need a kind of a shock, actually? Do you need a shock to the system to make the momentum there politically to make a change?
Or rather, more shocking, positive messaging through the to the public in general, so that they can learn that, oh, climate action is not just for damaging or cost and burden. It can be an opportunity for job creation. Every government in the whole world is looking for job creation opportunity. Why don't we spend on renewable energy to create more jobs? So if we, during the Great Depression in 1930, the Keynesians came up with an idea, spending money on just building the dams, right? Then why don't you do the same thing? Let's try to just building the solar panels around the world, around the desert, everywhere, so just to create jobs. Then in the end, it can save the world as well. So we can just change our mindset out of the box. I think that is what we need at the moment. Conventional approach cannot go incremental, but that's not enough, I think. Yeah.
Any questions from the floor on this?
I have a final.
Go on.
That. Maybe again, this is going sideways a little bit, but the analogy that's always been used is, no matter how much information about bad health effects, the fact is there are doctors who smoke. So it's not necessarily only a matter of education, but it's a matter of incentivizing policy to change. In that respect, for businesses, and especially for, I speak on from the investment community, investments are very agnostic in terms of climate policy. It doesn't really matter one way or another as long as there's, let's say, a positive return from the investment perspective. And from a business model too, there's really clear models that show that either one way for businesses to make money is by being more cost effective in volume, or by differentiating. And maybe to some degree we need to shift some of the emphasis or incentives or even dialogue for investment, not only in making more of energy, but just trying to make it, even if it's more expensive, as individualized as possible.
What kind of policies are happening in Singapore at the moment? That's where you're from, isn't it? What kind of things are going on there? Because it's a place which has been attempting to paint itself as green and ecological and forward-thinking. What kinds of things go on there?
I guess I have to say that it's still a very much a top-down policy model now. So for example, there really isn't a lot of incentives even for individuals to put rooftop solar, something as simple as that. There really hasn't been, at least in Asia, that kind of democratization or atomization of energy, of the energy ecology. What I find more interesting as a possible future direction is what I see in, I also live in San Diego, California. And over there, there's been a dramatic shift toward individual and rooftop solar as opposed to grid scale or economy, or what do you call it?
Off-grid or on-grid?
It's on-grid to the resistance of the main utility. But just by incentivizing it or making it a little more attractive for individual households to put a rooftop solar, you see a profusion of solar. I believe something like 30% of the energy for that region is coming from individual solar. And you also see a lot of electric cars, not necessarily because people think, oh, this is good for society, but oh, it's fairly cheap and I don't have to pay for gas. Maybe that's more of kind of like the positive nudge that we need to move some of the ecological goals we have going forward.
Do any of you have experience in China? Because we talked a little bit about that in the first session, and the heavy reliance on coal. What kind of positive signs might we be able to draw from China? Are there any?
I think it's quite positive when you see a lot of social discontent and further when you see high pollution days in Beijing. I mean, there are a lot of very unhappy individuals, and you can see government leaders are reacting to it, not necessarily because they think this is good or bad policy, but the constituents are unhappy.
Right, so what he was talking about, actually getting elected, comes back to that.
What was very interesting, we were part of, as the Regional Environmental Center, a big EU-China program that was running the EC2, the Europe-China Clean Energy Center. And part of the activities were focusing on policies and exchange of policymakers. But in the last 2 years of the center's activities, we were trying to work with city planners and bring them to Europe and European city planners to China and think about how to address the question of megacities. And this is what I was pointing out in my presentation too, that you have to really rethink your infrastructure, the present, and it's not only how you provide the energy, but also how do you provide the transport, how do you provide the food security, the water security, and you have to be part of that planning structure. And I think it was a very good way forward, and it translated into some of the policies that the government was picking up. And for me, it was extremely promising to see that China went into be one of the forefront fighters of renewable energy. What you see that they became market leaders in solar. And that happened during the past 10 years. There are a lot of opportunities, but I have to say that when you go and visit the cities, there are a lot of challenges related to congestion, related to air quality, and I think some of our experiences from the 50s, 60s could be picked up and also utilized there as well.
I'd like to add on what Marta has mentioned. I also see the positive aligning from the Chinese case. Of course, this is a big country, so it cannot change overnight. But the actions by the government has a very long-term consistency, and you will be surprised when you're visiting some of the cities in China. I visited one city, it's called Taiyuan, and they have 8,000 taxi, completely electric car, electric taxi. And also, even in Shanghai and many other major cities, all those scooters are already almost all of it, 99%, is electric already. And they are exporting electric bus to UK and to Korea. So they see huge potential in business opportunity in this investing in electric car, solar and renewable energy. So I think they have, unlike some other governments, they have a very long-term consistency and a very high level of commitments. Even though the pollution issue, yes, it is because of so many diverse small and medium enterprises are there, so it might take some time, but I see there's a very positive determination and actions at the top. I think China may emerge as maybe one of the leading countries in the renewable energy era. And for example, in Korea, we had the Green Growth Initiative 10 years ago, and then suddenly it just disappeared as the change of the government. Then now nobody remembers what had happened 10 years ago. So this is the situations in many countries. As I briefly mentioned the Costa Rican case earlier session, Costa Rica is a very also interesting case to study. I don't have enough time to explain it, but the success factor, the secret, was that whatever the government change happens, very interestingly, these governments maintained long-term consistent policy of reforestation and increasing the fossil fuel tax, recycling this tax for the replantation. And that has paid off, not overnight. It paid off only after 20 years.
So what is it that pushed the Costa Ricans to do that?
Because there was some kind of social consensus to keep our country green and to keep our country ecologically.
Because it's a tourist destination?
Yeah, now they become ecotourism's capital in the world. So it's the main source of their revenue. And it has a very positive social impact because many of the people in the village, remote villages, they make their good living out because they are now expert of ecotourism. So they are becoming a guide, expert guide for the people coming from outside. And they are very highly paid. It's not just the ordinary cheap paid guide. They are very expert level guide. So they're paying very high level. So it has an even very high positive impact on the social solidarity issues and also ecological issues. So there is a very
what kind of incentives could you see building in a country that doesn't particularly have tourism and doesn't particularly have an air quality problem, but is reliant on a kind of old-fashioned 20th century energy system? What kind of societal movement can grow to support the kind of change that we're talking about?
It is always difficult because country by country they have a very different situations, so they have to tailor-made what is the best for their own solutions. But there are many positive examples. That's why actually I compiled some of the success stories in my report before, and there I found out that Denmark was also a very positive example of a wind turbine. Vestas is a good example. They invest earlier than anybody else in the world. They were the leading company in the wind turbine technology.
But again, what happened in Denmark was because they had a scare in the 70s with the oil crisis, and they realized that they needed to deal with the problem.
Actually, that success story was not only happened because of the private sector. That technology was developed by public investment R&D by the government for a long time. Until it becomes commercially viable, it was not invested by private sector. William has been mentioning about private sector's investment.
But I'm saying that the initial impulse came from the fact that the country was scared by what happened to it, and they needed to find a solution.
Yes, it came from the political leadership.
Yeah.
When they suffered from oil crisis in the 70s, long time ago, then they better set a very long-term vision that we should not suffer from oil crisis anymore again. Then they had a long-term strategy and they tried to invest in that. It has been done by the public sector. Then later, the best technology was transferred from the public institution to a private company. Then they set up the commercial company, and then they promoted it.
But what kind of thing could happen in my country, the United Kingdom, to push it to make changes?
You have good examples like Ken Livingstone and also your foreign minister, the Boris. I think he was also a very good example of actual ecological.
I think he likes to take credit for lots of Ken's innovations, doesn't he? Yeah.
So I think each country can link it with the benefit, positive side. I think the secret is how the politicians can link the positive side of their climate action. Then I think they can be easily persuaded in the public.
Yeah. And the tax side? You didn't really talk about that much, but do you think that also has to be there? We have to come in with this carbon tax.
My personal view is I think it'll be extremely difficult to put anything with the word tax in it. I mean, that's just a reality.
I guess it's a toxic word.
Like I said, doctors smoke. I can't lose weight by Christmas. How are we going to have tax reform? That's something that I think even in the U.S. Congress, you have the one party controlling all levers of government, and they still can't pass tax reform.
Because what you were talking about was was very nice. I thought your image of this kind of startup kind of mentality that was the same kind of approach as what's happened with social media and smartphones and everything else. But have you talked widely about that, and what kind of feedback have you had from politicians, for example, when you're bringing across that model that you talk about?
I guess my perspective is it's maybe not necessary or even productive to bring in the political side, but just let individual consumer demand drive policy in that sense.
Can I just comment on what William just said? Yes, it will be very difficult to push the carbon tax. That's why I mentioned about eco-tax reform, which means that linking carbon tax with a reduction in income tax. So if you link it with a reduction of income tax, that has a different story. Because if you don't have that kind of a give and take, if it is just a net increase of a tax, it will be very difficult. That's why I said ecological tax reform is an interesting idea we can further explore. I think Germany experimented it, but I hope that more countries can experiment on this.
Are there other examples of countries that are taking on that idea?
You know, what is very interesting, it's quite important to note that when we talk about paradigm shift, we also have to redefine the vocabulary we are using. Because during the past decades, some of these words that we are using eroded. And immediately in your mindset, when you hear the word tax, you know the red light starts to blink. So when you talk about opportunities, and this is why, and not only challenges, but opportunities for growth. For instance, when I was talking about environment, I always said that we are talking about all the programs we were implementing. We're focusing on sustainable development. It's economical development with social inclusion, and at the end, the environment is getting better. So the output is going to be that a better environment. The same thing is about tax. If somebody would like to raise my tax, I would be not a happy person. But if it's done in a way that I am getting a benefit in some way that I can see as a taxpayer, and meanwhile it uses my tax for something that I'm also going to be benefiting for on the long run, then I'm willing to do that personal investment. But again, if we are not reframing the question and we are not using a different type of vocabulary, then things will not change that quickly how we are desperately needing. And what is very interesting, in spite of the fact that we have on the television broadcast from the hurricanes, and we know that the infrastructure is not there to protect the citizens, yet we are not thinking about when we are rebuilding it, to build it in a more prone way. So the question is, why not? And this is where I think your role as media person and your role as a communicator, global communicator, is going to be extremely important to showcase some of the positive messaging and already that is working around the world. And I think that would really make the difference.
Any questions from the floor? Okay, well then I think that we will wrap it up there. Thank you everybody for coming along to this Global Energy Prize Summit. A special thought for Michael Gratzel, who couldn't be here, this year's award winner, and I hope that we can see him at the event next time. I'd love to meet him personally. It's been a very enriching event. Thank you all very much. Very, very nice organization, great debate, great variety, and wonderful to have people from all around the world coming together here at Euronews. So thank you very much, and we have a nice cocktail break now for all of those who I'm sure you were rather hungry and thirsty after all of that, and follow up on some points that we've discussed here today. Thank you.